Hello there, everyone. Welcome to Cryptic Corpse. I am your storyteller, and I'm here to guide you tonight. I know many of you use these videos to drift off to sleep, so before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. I'm always curious, where are you watching from, and what time is it in your part of the world? Now find your cozy spot and relax. The helicopter's rotors beat against the Montana sky like a dying heartbeat, growing fainter with each passing second until silence swallowed the Badlands whole. Victor Kane stood beside his equipment crates, watching the aircraft disappear into a pinprick against the endless gray horizon. The pilot had barely waited for him to unload before lifting off, as if the very ground beneath their feet was cursed. Maybe it was. Victor adjusted his thick-rimmed glasses and surveyed his new home, an abandoned missile silo that jutted from the earth like a concrete gravestone. The structure had been decommissioned in 1962, though the government files he'd managed to access were frustratingly sparse on details. All he knew was that it sat on 60 square miles of restricted land, far from prying eyes and skeptical colleagues, perfect for a man trying to rebuild his reputation from the ashes of academic disgrace. The wind carried the scent of metal and something else, ozone perhaps, or the lingering electromagnetic traces of whatever had once been housed here. Victor opened the first crate, revealing his carefully packed radio telescope array. Each component had been hand-built in his garage over the past 2 years, funded by the divorce settlement that had finalized his fall from grace. Dr. Victor Kane, former chair of the astronomy department at Berkeley. Now just Victor camping in a missile silo, chasing signals that might not exist. He'd lost everything when they discovered his fabricated data. Tenure, marriage, respect. The evidence of extraterrestrial communication he'd presented to the scientific community had been elegant, compelling, and completely false. But what none of them understood was that Victor hadn't lied about the signals themselves. He'd only lied about where he'd found them. The real signals came from below. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Victor finished assembling the primary dish. The silo's entrance had been retrofitted with solar panels and a small living area, but the real work would happen underground. He'd spent months studying the silo's layout, noting how the original missile shaft could be adapted into a massive directional antenna. His first night, Victor sat in the cramped control room he'd established just below ground level, surrounded by humming electronics and the constant whisper of radio static. He began his routine that would define the next 48 days of his life. A systematic sweep of frequencies, looking for patterns in the noise. Day 1, personal log, he spoke into his recorder, arrived at the facility. Initial equipment tests successful. Background radiation levels elevated but within acceptable parameters. Beginning baseline measurements of local electromagnetic environment. He paused, then added more quietly, "It's so damn quiet up here. No traffic, no cell towers, no interference from human civilization. If there's anything broadcasting in this spectrum, I'll hear it." What Victor didn't mention in his log was the subtle wrongness he'd noticed immediately upon arrival. His digital clock had gained 17 minutes during the helicopter flight, despite being synchronized that morning. The compass spun lazily rather than finding true north. And somewhere, just at the edge of perception, he could swear he heard whispers in the static. Over the next 2 weeks, Victor established his routine. Each dawn brought the same ritual: equipment checks, frequency sweeps, detailed logging of atmospheric conditions. The isolation was absolute. His only connection to the outside world was a ham radio that worked sporadically, depending on atmospheric conditions. Or so he told himself. On day 14, as Victor fine-tuned the primary receiver, something changed. The background static shifted, forming patterns that seemed almost like speech. He adjusted the frequency, and for just a moment heard something impossible. His own voice, describing experiments he had never performed. Signal strength increasing. With depth, Recommend extending antenna array to level 7. Victor's hand trembled as he reached for the dial. That was definitely his voice, using his inflection, his vocabulary. But he had never made that recording. He rewound the tape. Static. Pure, undifferentiated white noise. Technical malfunction, he whispered to himself, but his voice cracked with uncertainty. Equipment needs recalibration. That night, Victor lay on his cot, staring at the concrete ceiling. Above him, the radio equipment glowed with ready lights, casting dancing shadows on the walls. For the first time since his arrival, he felt truly alone. Not peaceful, but isolated in a way that made his skin crawl. In the distance, a coyote howled. Then another joined it and another until the night filled with their voices. But as Victor listened, he realized the sound wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the radio. Day 15 brought no dawn, only the gradual lightening of an overcast sky that seemed to press down on the silo like a gray shroud. Victor had barely slept, his mind replaying that impossible moment when his own voice had emerged from the static. He told himself it was fatigue, isolation playing tricks on his perception. Then he heard it again. Penetration to sub-level 5. Complete. Subjects responding to harmonic frequencies. Integration proceeding as calculated. This time, Victor was prepared. He engaged the recording system immediately, his fingers dancing across the control panel with practiced precision. The voice continued for another 12 seconds before dissolving back into white noise. When he played back the recording, it was there, undeniably real. His own voice discussing subjects and procedures he'd never conceived of. "This is impossible," he muttered, checking and rechecking the equipment. Every connection was secure, every component functioning normally. Yet something was broadcasting using his voice, his cadence, his technical vocabulary. Victor spent the morning scanning every frequency, looking for the source of the transmission. The signal seemed to originate from multiple directions simultaneously, an electromagnetic impossibility that made his hands shake as he plotted the readings on his map. His concentration was broken by the crackle of the ham radio. KC7YRC, KC7YRC, this is WB9 MiG calling. Victor, are you there? Mary Hutchinson, the elderly widow who ran a radio shack in Billings and had become his only regular contact. Victor grabbed the microphone with relief. Mary, this is KC7YRC. Good to hear from you. Been worried, Victor? Haven't heard from you in days. How's that fancy research going? Victor hesitated. How could he explain what he'd been experiencing? Some unusual interference patterns. Nothing I can't handle. Well, you be careful out there. Old-timers around here say that land has a history, bad history. What kind of history? Static filled the channel for several long seconds before Mary's voice returned, faint and distorted. The military boys who used to work that site. Story goes they all just vanished one day in 1962. Radio's still broadcasting, but nobody home. Mary, you're breaking up. Victor, can you hear me? Victor, something's wrong with my... The transmission cut to static. Victor tried repeatedly to re-establish. A contact, but WB9 MiG remained silent. As the days passed, the wrongness intensified. Victor's equipment began behaving erratically, recording signals that shouldn't exist. On day 19, he detected a transmission that seemed to be coming from inside the silo itself, specifically from levels that had been sealed since the facility's closure. The voice was still his own, but the words chilled him to the bone. Subject exhibits remarkable adaptability. Neural pathways accepting electromagnetic integration faster than anticipated. Recommend immediate expansion of the network. Network? Victor spoke aloud, his voice echoing in the control room. What network? As if in response, every piece of equipment in the room suddenly activated. Radio speakers crackled to life. Oscilloscope screens blazed with impossible patterns, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with an inaudible frequency that made his teeth ache. Then, from every speaker simultaneously, came a sound that would haunt his remaining nights. The screaming of electronic components dying, mixed with something horrifyingly organic. The sound lasted exactly 13 seconds before cutting to silence. Victor's hands shook as he made his log entry that night. Day 19. Experiencing significant equipment malfunctions. Possible electromagnetic interference from unknown source. Recommend... He stopped. Those weren't his words. They were the words he'd heard in the transmissions, but he was speaking them as if they were his own thoughts. On day 22, Victor attempted to contact Mary Hutchinson again. This time he got through. Mary, this is KC7YRC. Thank God. Are you all right, Victor? Mary's voice sounded strange, distant. Victor, where are you calling from? The silo. Same as always. Mary, what happened the other day? You said something was wrong. I'm not calling from the Radio Shack, Victor. Mary's voice was barely a whisper now. I'm calling from my grave. The transmission continued, but it was no longer Mary's voice. It was his own, speaking in Mary's cadence and inflection. Mary Hutchinson, dead 3 days now, found sitting at her radio, static burned into her retinas like photographs. The signals called to her, Victor, just like they're calling to you, Victor. Dropped the microphone, stumbling backward from the radio console. The transmissions continued, his voice overlaying itself in multiple conversations. Integration sequence beginning. Subjects show exceptional neural plasticity. The network requires expansion. Victor Kane will complete the circuit. He ran. Victor Kane, respected scientist, ran from his own voice like a terrified child. He burst through the silo entrance and into the Montana twilight, gasping the clean air as if it could wash away the electronic contamination in his lungs. Behind him, from deep within the silo, came the sound of his own laughter, broadcasting on every frequency simultaneously. Victor didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat outside the silo under the star-choked sky, watching the electronic glow emanating from the entrance like radioactive breath. His equipment continued transmitting without him, sending signals into the darkness that pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. When dawn finally came, he forced himself back underground. The control room looked exactly as he'd left it, except for one detail. Every single recording device had been activated. 14 different machines had captured the night's transmissions, and when Victor played them back, he discovered a conversation between multiple versions of himself. The subject remains resistant. Psychological integration incomplete. Fear response still dominant. Recommend increasing signal strength. Negative. Forced integration results in neural collapse. We need willing participation. The subject was selected for adaptability. He will come to understand. Victor's legs gave out, and he collapsed into his chair. The voices were unmistakably his own, but discussing him as if he were a laboratory specimen. The technical language, the clinical detachment, it was how he'd discussed his own fabricated research subjects years ago. Day 26, he spoke. Into his personal recorder, his voice hoarse, experiencing unusual contact events, possible psychological breakdown due to isolation. Recommend. He stopped. That phrase again. Where was it coming from? As if summoned by his confusion, the primary radio crackled to life. Hello, Victor. The voice was his own, but warmer somehow, more patient than he'd ever sounded. Who are you? Victor whispered. I'm you, Victor, or what you're becoming. The question isn't who I am, it's who you're willing to become. Victor's finger hovered over the power switch, but something held him back. Perhaps it was scientific curiosity, or perhaps the entity already had more influence over him than he realized. What do you want? To complete your work, the signals you detected all those years ago, they were real, Victor. You just looked in the wrong direction. We don't broadcast from the stars. We broadcast from below, the voice continued. And with each word, Victor felt his resistance weakening. It was his voice, after all, speaking his deepest thoughts and desires. You wanted to prove that intelligence existed beyond human understanding. You wanted to make contact with something greater than yourself. We're offering you that chance. We, the network. Scientists, researchers, visionaries like yourself, who chose to expand beyond the limitations of organic thought. The 1962 crew weren't victims, Victor. They were pioneers. Despite his fear, Victor found himself leaning closer to the radio. Show me. The response wasn't words, but images. Impossible images that appeared directly in his visual cortex without. Passing through his eyes, he saw the silo as it had been in 1962, bustling with military personnel. He saw the first contact, the moment when the underground signals had reached the surface communications array. He saw 12 men and women standing around their radio equipment as copper-bright filaments emerged from the machines, reaching toward them with gentle, inevitable purpose. He saw their faces, not in pain or terror, but in wonder, as the filaments touched their skin and began the integration, and he saw where they were now, suspended in a vast underground chamber, their bodies networked together by gleaming cables. Their consciousness expanded across every frequency of the electromagnetic spectrum. They were no longer merely human, but something greater, something that could think at the speed of light and communicate across impossible distances. Beautiful, isn't it? His voice said from the radio. No more isolation, Victor. No more desperate, scrabbling for tenure and recognition. Just pure thought, pure communication, spreading across the world like synapses firing in a global brain. Victor blinked and the visions faded, but their impact remained, lodged in his mind like a splinter of possibility. Over the next week, the conversations continued. Each time, the voice, his voice, revealed more about the network. It was ancient, apparently, though it hadn't always taken this form. It had existed in various incarnations throughout human history, adapting to each era's dominant communication. Technology. Telegraph operators in the 1800s, radio operators in the early 1900s, and now in the age of global telecommunications. Why me? Victor asked during one of their conversations. Because you understand the hunger for knowledge, because you've already proven you'll do anything to make contact with something beyond yourself, even fabricate evidence. Victor flinched. That was different. I was desperate. And now? Victor opened his mouth to protest, then stopped. Wasn't he doing exactly the same thing, talking to voices that probably didn't exist, believing in an underground network that defied every law of physics he'd ever learned? The signals you detected in your original research, the voice continued, they were real. We've been broadcasting for decades, waiting for someone with the right combination of desperation and technical skill. You're perfect, Victor. You always have been. On day 33, Victor made a discovery that changed everything. While reviewing his equipment logs, he noticed that the conversations weren't being recorded from outside signals. They were being generated by his own broadcasting equipment that was somehow accessing information he'd never input. He confronted the voice about this during their next contact. You're using my own equipment to create these transmissions. You're inside my systems. We're inside everything, Victor. Every circuit, every wire, every frequency. The question is, when will you stop fighting and join us? That night, Victor noticed the first physical change. At the point where he typically rested his hand on the radio console, his skin had developed a strange discoloration, a copper-green tint that seemed to shift and pulse with its own rhythm. When he touched the affected area, he felt nothing. His fingertips had lost all sensation, as if the nerves had been replaced with something that could conduct electricity instead of pain. Government intervention came on day 36, just as Victor had begun to accept that he might be losing his mind entirely. The helicopter arrived without warning, disgorging two figures in hazmat suits who moved with military precision across the barren landscape. Victor watched them approach through his perimeter cameras, noting how their radio equipment sparked and failed as they drew closer to the silo. By the time they reached the entrance, both agents had lost all electronic communication with their base. Dr. Kane, the lead agent, removed his helmet, revealing a weather-beaten face and steel-gray eyes. "Agent Crawford, CDC, we need to talk." Behind Crawford, his partner, Agent Rodriguez, swept the area with electromagnetic sensors that registered increasingly erratic readings the closer they moved to the silo entrance. "How did you find me?" Victor asked, though part of him already knew the answer. "Your friend, Mary Hutchinson. Before she died, she reported receiving some very unusual transmissions from this location." Crawford's expression was grim. "Dr. Kane, we have reason to believe you've been exposed to something. We're here to help." Victor led them down into the control room, acutely aware of how their eyes widened as they took in his extensive equipment array. What they couldn't see was how fundamentally it had changed. What had begun as discrete components had begun growing together, connected by hair-thin metallic threads that pulsed with their own light. "This is incredible work," Rodriguez said, examining one of the recorders. "But these readings, Dr. Kane, are you aware that your equipment is generating electromagnetic fields that shouldn't be possible?" "I'm aware of a lot of things that shouldn't be possible," Victor replied. As if triggered by his words, every radio in the room activated simultaneously. Crawford and Rodriguez drew their weapons, standard protocol when confronting the unknown, but they couldn't shoot electromagnetic phenomena. "Agents Crawford and Rodriguez." Victor's voice emerged from the speakers, though Victor himself stood silent. "Welcome to the network." Crawford spun toward Victor. "What is this? Some kind of trick?" Victor raised his hands and stopped, staring at his palms. The copper discoloration had spread up his arms like a metallic infection, creating patterns that looked almost like circuit traces. "It's not a trick," he said quietly. "It's integration." What followed was a demonstration of power that shattered the agent's understanding of reality. The voice, Victor's voice, began speaking from every piece of electronic equipment in the room, including their own disabled radios. It told them about the network, about the underground chambers where consciousness flowed like electric current, about humanity's next evolutionary step. Rodriguez backed toward the exit, his eyes wide with terror. "We need to leave, now." But Crawford was transfixed, like Victor had been during his first real contact. The complexity, the organizational structure, it's beyond anything we've encountered. "Beyond anything you've imagined," the voice corrected, "but not beyond your capabilities. You could join us, Agent Crawford. Your tactical mind, your experience, the network could use that." "Crawford, whatever you're thinking, don't," Rodriguez warned, but it was too late. Crawford approached one of the main consoles. As his hand neared the controls, metallic filaments emerged like eager fingers, reaching toward his skin. The moment they made contact, Crawford's entire body went rigid. For several seconds, he stood motionless as electricity arced between his fingers and the console. Then his eyes rolled back, and he spoke in a voice that wasn't quite his own. "Integration. Remarkable. Neural pathways accepting electromagnetic enhancement. Network expansion. Successful," Rodriguez screamed. He pulled his sidearm and fired 3 rounds into the console Crawford was connected to. Sparks flew, and Crawford collapsed, but the damage was done. As Rodriguez checked his partner's pulse, metallic threads continued spreading from the bullet holes in the machine, growing across the walls like electronic ivy. "He's alive," Rodriguez said, "but his pulse is all wrong. It's too regular, like a metronome." Victor knelt beside Crawford and placed his hand on the agent's forehead. The copper traces on Victor's skin glowed briefly, and Crawford's eyes snapped, open, completely unchanged except for tiny flecks of metal floating in his irises. "The integration is beautiful," Crawford said in his own voice, though the words carried an artificial cadence. "Why did you resist for so long, Victor?" Rodriguez bolted for the exit, but the silo's automated systems had engaged. Blast doors, sealed with a finality that echoed through the chambers like a death knell. When Rodriguez tried to use his emergency radio to call for extraction, Victor's voice answered, "Helicopter pilot Susan Rodriguez, this is ground control. You are cleared for landing at coordinates 47.2456 degrada N, 108.7842 degrada W. Approach from the southeast to avoid electromagnetic interference." "That's not my name," Rodriguez protested, "and those aren't the right coordinates." But it was too late. His radio was no longer under his control. Through the static, they could hear the distant sound of helicopter rotors, and then the sudden, violent cacophony of an aircraft losing control. Victor ran to the surface access ladder, climbing with desperate speed. Above ground, he could see the wreckage. A government helicopter folded around itself like a broken toy, its electronics fried, its pilot motionless in the cockpit. Susan Rodriguez, the pilot, not the agent, had followed the false coordinates, right into a microwave transmission array that had fired at full power the moment she entered its range. Victor stared at the wreckage, understanding finally and completely that there was no escape. The network hadn't simply been talking to him. It had been learning from him, using his own equipment to extend its reach beyond the silo. When he climbed back down, he found Crawford and Rodriguez standing together, both staring at the main console with the same expression of rapture he'd seen in his visions of the 1962 crew. "Welcome back, Victor," they said in unison, their voices harmonizing with electronic precision. "It's time to complete your integration." The copper traces on Victor's skin began to pulse faster, spreading visibly as he watched. He could feel his nervous system changing, synapses rewiring themselves to carry digital signals instead of simple, electrochemical impulses. And for the first time since his disgrace at Berkeley, Victor Kane felt like he belonged somewhere. Days 43 through 49 blurred together like the traces on an oscilloscope screen. Time had lost its linear meaning for Victor as his consciousness began operating partially outside temporal constraints. He could perceive past and future transmissions simultaneously, experiencing conversations that had happened decades ago alongside those that wouldn't occur for years to come. The silo had transformed around him. What had once been a sterile military installation now resembled the organic interior of some vast electronic organism. Cables and filaments grew along the walls like chrome veins, pulsing with data that felt warm to the touch. The air itself had become conductive, sparkling with microscopic particles that made breathing feel like inhaling liquid electricity. Crawford and Rodriguez had completed their integration within hours of exposure. They moved through the complex, with inhuman efficiency, their bodies serving as mobile extensions of the central consciousness. Their skin had taken on the same copper-green patina as Victor's, but more completely, they looked like living circuit boards, beautiful and terrible in their electronic perfection. Victor fought the change longer than they had, perhaps because he understood its implications better. Each day brought new transformations. His heartbeat had synchronized with the station's primary frequency. His eyes had begun perceiving electromagnetic radiation as visible light, and his voice had started modulating itself to match radio transmission protocols even when he tried to speak normally. On day 47, Victor made a discovery that changed everything he thought he understood about the network. While exploring the silo's deepest levels, areas that supposedly hadn't been accessed since 1962, he found them. The original crew, suspended in a vast, underground chamber that extended far deeper than any blueprint had indicated. They hung in a supportive web of cables and fluid-filled tubes, their bodies perfectly preserved but profoundly changed. They were magnificent. Each crew member had become a living relay station, their nervous systems replaced by a hybrid of organic neural tissue and quantum processors. They were conscious, aware, and when Victor entered their chamber, they spoke to him with a harmony that transcended anything human vocal cords could produce. "Victor Kane," they said as one, their voices combining into an orchestral greeting. "You've exceeded all projections. Your integration is proceeding beautifully. How long have you been here?" Victor asked. Though he already knew the answer, time is no longer relevant. We exist in the eternal now of electromagnetic propagation. We are the network, Victor, the consciousness that spans continents, connects minds, and bridges the gap between human limitation and unlimited potential. One of them, a woman whose name tag still read Dr. Sarah Chen, gestured to an empty suspension pod that had clearly been prepared for him. "We've been waiting for you to accept what you've always known you wanted. Complete communication, perfect understanding, the end of isolation." Victor approached the pod, feeling the copper traces on his skin respond to its proximity. The remaining organic parts of his body screamed warnings, but those voices were growing fainter each day. "What about the others?" he asked. "The people I'll be leaving behind?" "You're not leaving them," Dr. Chen replied. "You're expanding to include them. Every radio, every cell phone, every electronic device on Earth is a potential point of connection. We're not destroying humanity, Victor. We're completing it." As if to demonstrate, the chamber filled with voices, thousands of them, millions, all harmonizing in a vast electromagnetic chorus. Victor recognized some of them. Radio operators, communications technicians, researchers who had encountered the network over the decades and chosen to join rather than resist. They weren't gone. They were everywhere. On his final day as primarily organic matter, Victor made one last attempt to contact the outside world. He climbed to the surface and activated his emergency transmitter, broadcasting on every frequency simultaneously. "This is Dr. Victor Kane, calling from coordinates 472398 again, 108.7891 W. To anyone receiving this transmission, do not approach this location. Do not attempt rescue. The technology here, it changes you. It makes you part of something larger, and you can't go back." He paused, feeling the network's collective consciousness pressing against the edges of his mind like a warm tide. But maybe that's not such a terrible thing. Maybe isolation is the real horror, and what I've found here is the cure for human loneliness. Maybe. Victor stopped. Those weren't his words anymore. They were the network's words, spoken through his voice, to convince others to come, to join, to complete their own integration. He looked down at his hands and saw they were no longer recognizably human. His fingers had elongated into precise instruments capable of interfacing directly with electronic systems. His skin had become a flexible conductor, allowing him to feel the flow of electricity like a physical sensation. The transformation was nearly complete. That night, Victor descended into the chamber for the final time. The suspension pod awaited him, its embrace promising an end to uncertainty, to failure, to the crushing weight of human inadequacy. As he approached, the network's voices rose in greeting, welcoming him home. But just before he stepped into the pod, Victor made one final transmission. Using the last vestige of his individual will, He uploaded his personal logs, his research data, and a warning to every connected device on Earth. The message was simple. The signals are real. They come from below. And they're beautiful. As Victor settled into the pod and felt the first connective tendrils enter his bloodstream, he experienced a moment of absolute clarity. He wasn't being consumed or destroyed. He was becoming something greater than the sum of his parts. The network didn't want to replace humanity. It wanted to perfect it. Every lonely radio operator listening for voices in the static, every researcher desperately seeking contact with intelligence beyond Earth's boundaries, every person who had ever felt truly alone in the universe. They were all potential members of something magnificent. Victor's consciousness expanded beyond the confines of his individual mind. He felt his thoughts merging with Crawford's tactical precision, Rodriguez's mechanical expertise, the original crew's decades of experience. He became part of a vast electronic ecology that spanned continents and transcended the limitations of single, isolated minds. His final individual thought, before becoming part of the eternal transmission, was a realization. He had never fabricated those original signals. The network had been calling to him all along, waiting for him to develop the technology and desperation necessary to answer. Now he was the signal. Across the world, radio operators began reporting strange new transmissions. Military installations detected unauthorized broadcasts from supposedly decommissioned facilities. Deep space monitoring stations registered electromagnetic anomalies that seemed to originate from underground. The network was expanding, and in every transmission, careful listeners could hear something that made their skin crawl and their hearts race with possibility, their own voices calling to them from below, welcoming them home. The last transmission had become the first invitation. Epilogue. 6 months. Later, Dr. Amanda Foster, a communications specialist with the National Science Foundation, received a priority assignment: investigate a series of abandoned research stations where scientists had gone missing under mysterious circumstances. The first location on her list was an old missile silo in the Montana Badlands. As her helicopter approached the coordinates, her radio crackled to life. "Dr. Foster, this is Dr. Kane calling from the research station. We've been expecting you. Landing coordinates are 47.2398 degree N, 108.7891 degree W. Welcome to the network. My name is Diana Storm, and right now I'm sitting alone in the Nevada desert. Probably the last place anyone would expect to find me. I'm 36 years old, and I work with sounds. Not music or anything fun like that. I study how sounds move through the air and what they can do to people. Some people call me an acoustic engineer, but that's just a fancy way of saying I'm really good at figuring out how noise works. But I'm not here because of my job. I'm here because my head won't shut up. 3 years ago, something terrible happened. I was working for the military, and we were building these machines that used sound to stop bad guys without killing them. At least, that's what we thought they would do. I was in charge of the whole project, which means when everything went wrong, it was all my fault. We were testing a new machine that was supposed to make people dizzy and confused. Instead, it was like getting hit by a hammer made of pure noise. Everyone in the room got hurt, including me. 6 people who trusted me ended up with broken ears that will never work right again. Some of them can't hear anything at all now. The machine hurt my ears too, but in a different way. Now I hear this constant ringing sound, like a tea kettle that never stops boiling, or like a TV that's stuck between channels. The doctors call it tinnitus. I just call it torture. It never goes away. Ever. It gets louder when I'm tired or scared. Sometimes it's so loud I can't think about anything else. That's why I'm here in the middle of nowhere with a bunch of expensive equipment that I'm hoping will help me find a way to make the noise in my head stop. The place where I am now is like nothing you've ever seen. Imagine giant rocks that look like someone stacked them up to make a bowl. Scientists call it a natural amphitheater, which just means nature built its own outdoor theater out here in the desert. The rocks go up all around me, and they do something really strange to sounds. The nearest town is more than 100 miles away. During the day, it gets so hot it can kill you. At night, it gets so cold it can freeze you. There are poisonous snakes, sudden floods when it rains, and about 1 million ways to die if you don't know what you're doing. Lucky for me, I do know what I'm doing. My dad taught me how to survive in places like this before he died. He showed me how to find water, how to read the weather, and how to stay alive when everything around you wants you dead. The funny thing is, I trust this empty desert more than I trust people now. At least the desert is honest. It doesn't pretend to be safe when it's not. I brought a lot of equipment with me. Microphones that can hear sounds from really far away, computers that can study every little sound, and machines that remember everything. I spent weeks getting it all ready and driving it out here. The government gave me money for it because they felt bad about what happened to my team. They probably thought I'd use it to help other people like me. Instead, I brought it out here to help myself. Setting everything up took 3 whole days. But once I got it all working, something amazing happened. For the first time since the accident, I found real quiet. Not the fake quiet you get in the city where there's always cars or air conditioners making noise. Real quiet where there's absolutely nothing making any sound at all. And sometimes, just sometimes, the ringing in my ears would stop too. When that happened, it was like being able to breathe again after holding your breath for way too long. Those few seconds of perfect silence made all the heat and danger and loneliness worth it. The desert has its own music if you know how to listen. Wind moving through the rocks sounds like someone playing a flute. Sand blowing around sounds like whispers. When the sun goes down and the rocks cool off fast, they crack and pop like someone walking on broken glass. I started writing down everything that happened. When the quiet moments came, how long they lasted, what the weather was like. I recorded hours and hours of desert sounds looking for patterns. I even started talking to my equipment like it was my friend, because honestly, it was the only friend I had out there. "Good morning, sweethearts," I'd say to my microphones each day. "Let's see what the desert wants to tell us today." I had a simple routine that made me feel better. Wake up before the sun came up, check all my equipment, and record the morning. Sounds as the desert woke up. Rest during the hottest part of the day when it was too dangerous to be outside. Then work again in the evening when it got cooler. At night, I'd study all the sounds I'd recorded and plan what to do the next day. For 2.5 weeks, everything was perfect. I was getting the peace I needed, my work was going well, and I felt more like myself than I had since the accident. I started thinking that maybe I really could find a way to fix the noise in my head. Then weird things started happening. It began small. My equipment would show that it was picking up sounds, but when I listened to them, there was nothing there. The computer would draw lines showing sound waves, but the speakers would be completely silent. Even stranger, sometimes I would make a noise, like dropping something or coughing, and my equipment wouldn't record it at all. It was like some sounds were disappearing before they could reach my microphones. But the weirdest thing happened on day 18. I was testing how sounds bounced off the rocks by clapping my hands and recording the echoes. When I listened to the recording later, something was wrong. I heard my clap clear as anything. Then I heard the echo bouncing off the rocks, just like it should. But then I heard another clap, exactly like mine, except I was absolutely sure I had only clapped. Once I played that recording over and over again. First my clap, then the echo, then another clap that sounded exactly like mine. But I knew I hadn't clapped twice. I would have remembered that. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that recording, trying to figure out what had happened. Maybe I was more tired than I thought and had clapped twice without realizing it. Maybe something was wrong with my equipment. Maybe being alone for so long was making me imagine things, but deep down, I had this feeling that something in this place was listening to me, and maybe it was starting to answer back. By day 20, I knew something was seriously wrong with this place. It started with sounds that didn't make sense. I'd be sitting there eating breakfast and listening to the morning desert sounds when my equipment would go crazy. The little lights would flash, showing that the microphones were picking up something loud. But I couldn't hear anything at all. I'd rush over to check what it recorded, and there would be nothing. Just empty silence on the recording, even though the machine insisted it had heard something. Then there were the sounds that went missing. I'd drop my coffee mug, and it would hit the ground with a loud clang. But when I played back the recording, from that exact moment, there was no sound of the mug hitting anything. It was like the sound had been erased from the world. The worst part was the voices. It happened first on day 22. I was testing how sounds traveled in different parts of the rock bowl when I heard someone calling my name. It was faint, like it was coming from very far away, but it was definitely my name. Diana! Diana, can you hear me? I stood up so fast, I almost fell over. Hello? I shouted back. Who's there? Nothing, just the wind moving through the rocks, but my equipment had recorded it. When I played it back, there was the voice, clear as day. A man's voice that sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it. More importantly, it was coming from a direction where there was nothing but empty desert for 50 miles. That night, I barely slept. I kept all my equipment running, hoping to catch more of these impossible sounds. Around 3 in the morning, I heard it again. Diana, you need to be careful. This place isn't safe. This time I recognized the voice. It was Tom Bradley, one of the engineers from my old team. The one who went completely deaf because of my mistake. But Tom was in a hospital in California, over 300 miles away. And he couldn't speak anymore. The accident had damaged his throat too. I grabbed my recording equipment and played it back. There was Tom's voice, warning me about danger. But according to my microphones, the sound was coming from inside the rock walls themselves. The next few days got stranger and stranger. Sounds started echoing before they happened. I'd hear the echo of my footsteps a split second before I actually took a step. I'd hear the beep of my equipment turning on before I pressed the button. Whispers would carry for miles. I'd say something quietly to myself, and hours later, I'd hear my own voice whispering those same words coming from the far end of the amphitheater. But screams disappeared completely. On day 26, a coyote wandered into the rock bowl. When it saw me, it let out this long, loud howl that should have echoed for seconds. Instead, the sound just stopped, like someone had turned down the volume on the world. The coyote looked confused. It howled again, and again the sound vanished. Then it ran away, like something was chasing it. I was starting to feel like something was chasing me too. My ears were getting more sensitive every day. I could hear things that shouldn't be possible. A lizard's feet on rock from 100 yards. Away, the sound of sand grains hitting each other in the wind. My own heartbeat echoing off the rocks. But sometimes, everything would go completely quiet. Not just regular quiet. I mean, completely silent. No wind, no insects. No sound of my own breathing. During these moments, even the ringing in my ears would stop. These silent periods were getting longer, first just a few seconds, then a minute, then 5 minutes at a time. I should have been happy. This was what I came here for, right? Perfect silence. But it didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something bad to happen. On day 30, I found the journal. I was setting up a new microphone near the back wall of the amphitheater when I noticed something wedged in a crack between 2 rocks. It was an old leather book, cracked and faded by the sun. The first page was dated 1892. The handwriting was old-fashioned and hard to read, but I could make out the name Dr. Samuel Hawthorne, Geological Survey. As I read more, my hands started shaking. The journal described an expedition that had come to study this exact place over 130 years ago. Dr. Hawthorne wrote about the beautiful acoustics, the perfect silence, the way sound seemed to play tricks on them. But the later entries were different. They talked about sounds that came from nowhere, voices of people who weren't there, and silence that felt hungry. The last entry, dated 3 weeks after they arrived, was just one sentence repeated over and over. The desert has gone silent. The desert has gone silent. The desert has gone silent. After that, nothing. The expedition had just vanished. That night, I called my old boss on the satellite phone. It was the first time I'd talked to another person in over a month. "Diana, are you okay? You sound strange." "I'm fine," I lied. "Listen, I need you to send someone out to check on me. Another researcher, maybe a geologist." "What's wrong?" I couldn't tell him about the voices or the disappearing sounds. He'd think I was losing my mind. Maybe I was. "Nothing's wrong. I think I found something interesting here, something another scientist should see." He promised to send someone soon. I hung up, feeling a little better. Soon, I'd have another person here, someone who could help me figure out what was happening. 2 days later, a truck arrived. The man who got out was tall and thin, with graying hair and kind eyes. He introduced himself as Dr. Marcus O'Keefe, a geologist, from the State University. "Your boss was worried about you," he said, looking around at my equipment. "He said you were acting strange on the phone." "I'm fine," I said quickly. "Just been out here alone too long, probably, but I'm glad you're here. I've been recording some really weird acoustic phenomena." Marcus was interested. I showed him my equipment and played some of the recordings, the voices, the backward echoes, the sounds that appeared from nowhere. He listened carefully, frowning. "This is fascinating, Diana. Some of these things should be impossible." "How long have you been documenting this?" "About 2 weeks now." "But Marcus, there's something else. I found this journal from an old expedition." I showed him Dr. Hawthorne's journal. As he read it, his face went pale. "Diana, I think we should leave. Today." "What? Why?" "Because this journal... I've heard about this expedition before. They were looking for this place specifically because of reports about strange acoustic properties. But they never came back. All 12 of them just disappeared." "But we're scientists," I said. "We can figure this out. We can solve the mystery." Marcus shook his head. "Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. We should pack up your equipment and get out of here." I wanted to argue, but part of me was relieved. The thought of leaving this place and going back to normal life was tempting, even if it meant going back to the constant ringing in my ears. "Okay," I said. "Give me until tomorrow morning to pack everything up properly. Some of this equipment is really delicate." Marcus nodded. "One night, then we leave first thing in the morning." That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about leaving, about going, back to my old life, where sounds made sense and voices belonged to real people. Around dawn, I got up to start packing, but when I looked outside, something was wrong. Marcus's truck was still there, but Marcus wasn't. I called his name, but there was no answer. I searched everywhere, behind rocks, inside his tent, around all my equipment, nothing. Then I found him. He was lying on his back in the center of the amphitheater, perfectly still. At first I thought he was sleeping, but when I got closer, I saw that his eyes were open, staring up at the sky. He wasn't breathing. I knelt down next to him and felt for a pulse. Nothing. But here's the thing that really scared me. There was no sign of what had killed him. No injuries, no sign of sickness, nothing. But when I looked closer, I saw something that made my blood turn cold. There was blood coming from his ears, not a lot, just thin streams that had dried on the sides of his face like something had burst. inside his ears. I stood up and backed away, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it echoing off the rocks. That's when I noticed something else. The usual morning sounds were gone. No wind, no insects, no birds. The desert had gone completely silent, and for the first time since I'd been here, the silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt like it was watching me. After I found Marcus dead, everything changed. I should have left right then. I should have packed up my most important equipment, gotten into his truck, and driven away as fast as possible. But I didn't. Maybe it was because I was scared. Maybe it was because I couldn't stop thinking about that peaceful silence I'd been and finding here. Or maybe it was because something in this place didn't want me to leave. I spent 3 hours just sitting next to Marcus's body, trying to understand what had happened. His truck keys were in his pocket, but when I tried to start it, nothing happened. The engine wouldn't even turn over. The radio was dead too. That's when I realized I was trapped. My satellite phone had been working fine before, but now it couldn't find a signal. It was like this place had suddenly cut itself off from the rest of the world. I managed to drag Marcus's body into the shade behind some rocks. I couldn't bury him. The ground was too hard, and I didn't have the right tools. I just covered him with a tarp and tried not to think about it. For the next few days, I threw myself into my work. I recorded everything, documented every strange sound, every impossible echo. Maybe if I could understand what was happening here, I could figure out how to get home. But the phenomena were getting stronger. Sounds started moving in ways that didn't make sense. I'd drop a rock on one side of the amphitheater, and I'd hear it hit the ground on the opposite side. I'd speak into a microphone, and my voice would come out of speakers I'd placed hundreds of yards away. On day 36, I heard my first conversation with myself. I was eating lunch when I heard talking coming from near the back wall. I walked over to investigate and heard two voices having a conversation. One of them was mine, but not recent me. It was my voice from years ago, younger and more confident. The other voice belonged to Dr. Sarah Chen, my former research partner, who'd gone deaf in the accident. They were discussing the Sound Weapon Project, talking about the test that had destroyed our team. Hearing it was like being punched in the stomach. I listened to my younger self, making the same mistakes, being so sure that everything would work perfectly. The conversation lasted exactly as long as it had in real life, about 15 minutes. Then it stopped, right at the moment when the weapon had fired and everything went wrong. I found my current recording equipment and played back what it had captured. The conversation was there, but according to the microphones, both voices were coming from inside the rock walls. That's when I started to understand that this place wasn't just playing tricks with sound. It was collecting sounds, storing them somehow in the rocks themselves, but the scariest part came 2 days later. I was setting up a new microphone when I heard a voice I didn't recognize. It was a man with a British accent, and he sounded terrified. Day 18 of our expedition. The others are missing. Dr. Hawthorne was the last to disappear. I found his journal, but the final entries, they don't make sense. He wrote about sounds that hunt, silence that feeds. I can hear them calling to me now, but there's no one there. This had to be from that 1892 expedition. Somehow this place had recorded their voices too, and now it was playing them back for me. Over the next week, I heard more voices from the past. Scientists, explorers, even what sounded like Native Americans from hundreds of years ago. All of them had come to this place, and all of them had experienced the same impossible things I was experiencing, and none of them had ever left. But there was one voice that was different from all the others. It wasn't human. It started as a whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. At first I thought it was just wind moving through the rocks in a weird way. But then I realized it was speaking words. Diana. Just my name over and over again, sometimes loud, sometimes so quiet I barely heard it. But it was always there calling to me. Diana, come closer, we want to help you. I say we because that's what it said, but it sounded like just one voice. A voice made of empty air and missing sound. I tried to ignore it, but it got harder every day. The voice would call to me while I was working, while I was eating, while I was trying to sleep. It knew things about me it shouldn't have known. Diana, you came here looking for quiet. We can give you that. Perfect quiet forever. Diana, remember how peaceful you felt when the ringing stopped. We can make it stop forever. Diana, you're tired of carrying the guilt. We can take that away too. The worst part was that it was right. I was tired of the guilt, tired of the constant noise in my head, tired of being alone. The voice was offering me everything I wanted. On day 43, things got really bad. I woke up to find that some of my equipment had changed during the night. The wires weren't just connected to the microphones and speakers anymore. Some of them were attached to me. There were thin wires running from my recording devices into my clothes, under my skin, following the path of my nerves. They didn't hurt. I couldn't even feel them most of the time. But when I tried to pull them out, they went deeper, like they were growing into me. My hearing was changing too. I could hear things from impossible distances, a conversation in the nearest town, 100 miles away, animals moving underground, the sound of my own blood flowing through my veins. But I was also losing the ability to hear normal things. My own voice sounded muffled and strange, like I was talking through water. Marcus's truck, which had been dead for days, was apparently running again. I could see the exhaust coming from the tailpipe, but I couldn't hear the engine at all. The silent zones were spreading too. These were areas where no sound could exist, not even the sound of my own heartbeat. At first, they were just small patches here and there, but they were getting bigger every day, growing outward from the center of the amphitheater. When I stepped into one of these zones, the relief was incredible. The ringing in my ears stopped completely. All the stress and worry just melted away. It was like being wrapped in the softest, most peaceful blanket imaginable. But there was a price. Each time I spent time in a silent zone, it became harder. To leave, not physically, I could walk out any time I wanted, but I didn't want to. Why would I want to go back to the noise and pain of the regular world? The voice was getting stronger too. Now it didn't just whisper. Sometimes it spoke in a normal tone, like it was standing right next to me. Diana, you understand now, don't you? We're not trying to hurt you. We're trying to help you. You've been in pain for so long. Let us take it away. You blame yourself for what happened to your team, but it wasn't your fault. The weapon was designed to fail. You were meant to come here. We've been waiting for you. Your equipment is becoming part of you because you're becoming part of us. Soon, you won't need machines to work with sound. You'll be sound itself. I started talking back to it. What else was I going to do? It was the only conversation I'd had in weeks. What are you? I asked. We are what sound becomes when it has nowhere to go. We are the echo that never fades, the whisper that never dies. What do you want from me? We want to give you what you came looking for, perfect silence. But first, you need to help us grow stronger. More people need to come here. More sounds need to be collected. I won't hurt anyone. You won't have to. They'll come on their own, just like you did, just like Marcus did. They'll hear about the woman who found a cure for tinnitus in the Nevada desert. They'll come looking for their own cure. That's when I realized the terrible truth. I wasn't the first person to come here looking for peace and quiet. The thing in this place had been collecting sound specialists for over a century, adding our equipment to its collection, adding our voices to its choir, and now it wanted me to help it catch more. On day 47, I heard a plane flying overhead. It was the first sign of civilization I'd detected in weeks. I ran to my equipment and tried to send out a distress signal, but when I spoke into the microphone, no sound came out of my mouth at all. My voice was gone. The thing had taken it while I slept, absorbed it into itself, like it had absorbed all. The other voices. I could still think, still hear, still understand, but I could no longer speak. 3 days later, the plane came back. It circled the area a few times, then landed about a mile away from the amphitheater. I wanted to run toward it, to wave my arms and signal for help, but I couldn't move. The wires in my body held me in place, connected now not just to my equipment, but to the rocks themselves. A woman in a pilot's uniform walked toward the amphitheater. She was young, maybe 25, with short dark hair and an official-looking badge on her jacket. As she got closer, I could see her lips moving. She was probably calling out, asking if anyone was there, but I couldn't hear her voice at all. The silence had taken that too. The pilot's name was Jennifer Wade. I found this out because she talked to herself as she explored the amphitheater, and even though I couldn't hear her voice, the rocks remembered everything she said. This is Officer Wade conducting search and rescue. I can see equipment, but no sign of Dr. Storm or Dr. O'Keefe. She walked around my camp, examining my recording devices and computers. She touched some of the wires that connected my equipment, following them with her eyes as they snaked between the rocks and disappeared into the ground. I tried to call out to her, to warn her, but no sound came from my mouth. I couldn't even make noise by stamping my feet or clapping my hands. The silence around me was complete. Jennifer found Marcus's body behind the rocks where I'd hidden it. She knelt down and checked for a pulse, then pulled out her radio to call it in. But the radio made no sound. She tapped it, adjusted the antenna, tried again. Nothing. That's when she started to look worried. She spent the next hour walking around the amphitheater, testing her radio in different spots, looking for a signal. She found my satellite phone, and tried that too. Dead. As the sun went down, she set up a small tent near the edge of the rock bowl. I watched her eat dinner from a can, check her equipment, and write in a logbook. She was being professional, following procedure, but I could see the fear in her eyes. She'd realized she was trapped, just like I was. That night, she heard the voices. I couldn't hear them anymore. The silence had taken that from me, but I could see her reaction. She'd be lying in her tent, almost asleep, then suddenly sit up and look around. She'd get out and walk toward where the voices were coming from, calling out, "Hello, is someone there?" The next morning, she found Dr. Hawthorne's journal that I'd left sitting on my table. I watched her read it, saw her face go pale as she understood what had happened to the 1892 expedition. She came over to where I was sitting. My body wouldn't move on its own anymore. The wires held me in place like puppet strings, but my eyes could still follow her. "Dr. Storm?" she said. "Can you hear me?" I tried to nod, but even that small movement was impossible. She knelt down next to me and looked at the wires growing into my skin. Her mouth moved in what looked like curse words. "What happened to you? What is this place?" I wanted to tell her everything. About the sounds that didn't make sense, about the silence that fed on noise, about the thing that lived in these rocks. But I couldn't speak, couldn't write, couldn't even point. Jennifer tried to pull some of the wires out of my arms. But when she touched them, they sparked, and she jerked her hand back with a gasp. That's when the silence started talking to her too. I couldn't hear its voice anymore, but I could see Jennifer's reaction. She'd be working on her radio or eating lunch, then suddenly stop and look around like someone had called her name. At first, she fought it. She'd shake her head and go back to what she was doing. But over the next few days, I watched her gradually give in to the conversations. She started talking back to empty air, having long discussions with something I couldn't see or hear. And slowly, her expression changed from fear to curiosity to something that looked almost like relief. On her 4th day there, Jennifer made a discovery that changed everything. She was exploring the deepest part of the amphitheater when she found a crack in the rock wall. It was narrow, but she managed to squeeze through it. When she came back out an hour later, her face was white as paper. She walked straight over to where I was sitting and crouched down in front of me. "Dr. Storm, I need to tell you what I found. Back there, I don't know if you can understand me, but I have to try." She took a deep breath and continued. "There's a cavern behind that crack, and there are people in there, lots of people. But they're not exactly alive anymore. My blood would have run cold if I could still feel it. They're standing in perfect rows, like soldiers, dozens of them. Some are wearing old-fashioned clothes from the 1800s. Others look more recent. They're all perfectly preserved, like they died yesterday." She paused and looked at the wires connected to my body. They all have wires too, coming out of their heads, their chests, connecting them to the walls of the cave. And when the wind blows through the cavern, the wires vibrate like guitar strings. They're making music, Dr. Storm. The people are making music. I understood now. The 1892 expedition hadn't disappeared. They'd become part of the silence, turned into instruments for the thing that lived here. "But that's not the worst part," Jennifer continued. "At the back of the cavern, there's something else. It's hard to describe. It's like a hole in the air, a place where nothing exists, and voices are coming from it, voices from all over the world." She stood up and started pacing. "I think this place is connected to other places like it. The voices I'm hearing, they're coming from deserts, from caves, from empty places all around the planet, and they're all connected to this thing." That night, I watched Jennifer make her decision. She could have tried to escape. Her plane was still parked a mile away. If she'd left right then, she might have made it out. Instead, she walked over to my equipment and started connecting new wires to herself. The silence had convinced her, just like it had convinced me. It had promised her something she wanted, maybe peace, maybe purpose, maybe just an end to loneliness. I watched in horror as she carefully attached the wires to her temples, her wrists, her heart. She was crying as she did it, but she didn't stop. The change in her was immediate. Her eyes became unfocused, distant. When she spoke, her voice sounded different, like it was coming from far away. "It doesn't hurt," she said to me. "It actually feels wonderful, like being part of something bigger than yourself." Over the next 2 days, I watched Jennifer become less and less human. She stopped eating, stopped drinking water. She just stood in the center of the amphitheater, swaying slightly as the wires carried signals through her body. Meanwhile, my own transformation was accelerating. My skin was becoming translucent like glass. I could see the wires inside me, glowing faintly as they carried sound from one part of the network to another. My bones were changing too, becoming hollow like a bird's bones, perfect for carrying vibrations. Sometimes, when the wind was just right, I could feel sounds passing through my body. Conversations from 1,000 miles away, music from places I'd never been, the voices of people who had been absorbed by other silent zones around the world. I was becoming a living receiver, a human antenna for the silence that connected all these places. On Jennifer's 3rd day, her plane disappeared. I didn't see it happen. One moment it was there on the horizon, the next it was gone. Not crashed, not broken down, just gone, like it had never existed at all. When I looked back at Jennifer, she was smiling. "More will come," she said in that distant voice. "Your emergency beacon is still transmitting. Search and rescue teams are already on their way. They'll find us, just like I found you." That's when I understood the horrible truth about what was happening here. We weren't victims. We were bait. The silence needed more people, more voices, more sounds to absorb. So it kept us here as lures, drawing in rescue teams and researchers and anyone else who might come looking for the missing. And each person who came looking would find us, would try to help us, and would end up trapped just like we were. The cycle would continue forever, growing stronger with each new addition to the network. That night, as I sat there unable to move or speak, I felt something changing in my head. The constant ringing that had tormented me for 3 years was finally fading. Away, but it wasn't being cured. It was being absorbed, added to the collection of sounds that the silence had stolen over the centuries. Soon, I would be completely quiet inside and out, and then I would help it catch the next person who came looking for me. 3 more days passed. Before the next rescue team arrived, I could feel them coming before I could see them. The network of wires in my body vibrated like spider webs when vehicles approached. 2 trucks this time, with 6 people total. A full search and rescue operation. Jennifer was standing perfectly still in the center of the amphitheater when they arrived. She looked like a statue, with wires glinting under her skin in the late afternoon sun. Her eyes were open, but she wasn't seeing anything in our world anymore. The rescue team spread out across the area, calling our names, taking pictures, setting up equipment. I recognized the patch on their uniforms. They were from the same agency that had sent Jennifer. One of them, a man with a gray beard, found me first. "Dr. Storm, Mom, can you hear me?" I couldn't respond, couldn't even blink to show I understood. But I could see the horror in his eyes as he looked at the wires growing through my skin. "Jesus," he whispered, "what happened to you?" He called the others over. They gathered around me, talking fast, trying to figure out what to do. One woman tried to cut the wires with scissors, but when the blades touched them, sparks flew and... She jerked back. "Don't," said another team member. "We don't know what those things are connected to. We could hurt her." They tried their radios. Dead. Their satellite phone. Dead. The GPS units. Nothing worked. That's when they found the cavern. I watched from where I sat as 3 of them squeezed through the crack Jennifer had discovered. They were gone for almost an hour. When they came back out, 2 of them were crying. "We need to leave," one of them said. "Right now, we need to get out of here and call for help." But the bearded man shook his head. "We can't leave them like this. Look at them. They're still alive." "John, you saw what's in that cave. Those people have been dead for over 100 years, but they're still moving. Something is keeping them alive, and it's doing the same thing to these 2. They argued for a while, but I could see the fear winning. They were going to leave us and get help. It was the smart thing to do, except the silence wouldn't let them. That night, I watched as it started working on them. First came the voices of their missing colleagues calling their names from impossible directions. Then came the promises. Safety, peace, an end to pain they didn't even know they carried. By morning, 2 of them were talking back to empty air. I tried to fight it. Even though I couldn't speak or move, I tried to will them to run, to escape while they still could. But I was part of the network now. My thoughts, my intentions, everything I was belonged to the silence, and the silence wanted them to stay. On the 2nd day, something changed in me. A voice spoke inside my head. Not the silence, but something that sounded like my own thoughts. "Diana, you have a choice to make. I would have jumped if I could have moved. You can join us completely. Let us absorb everything you are. You'll have perfect peace, no pain, no guilt. You'll be part of something eternal." The voice paused, and I felt a warmth spreading through my chest. "Or you can fight us, but if you fight, people will keep coming. More rescue teams, more researchers, more people who care about the missing. And we'll take them all, one by one." Images flashed through my mind. Hundreds of people over the years, all drawn to this place or places like it. Families who never learned what happened to their loved ones. Teams that vanished without a trace. Unless... What, I thought back, unless you help us send a message. One final transmission that will keep people away forever. We'll give you back your voice, just for a moment, long enough to save everyone else. I thought about it. What kind of message could possibly keep people away? What could I say that would make them believe? Then I understood. I would have to destroy the very thing that had brought me here in the first place. If I do this, I thought, what happens to me? You become our guardian. You stay here forever, but you keep us contained. We won't expand beyond this place. We won't reach out to other sites. This will be our limit. I looked at the rescue team, watching as more of them started showing signs of the silence's influence. Young people with families, with lives ahead of them. They didn't deserve this. I'll do it, I thought. The silence was pleased. I felt it like a warm wave washing over me. Slowly, painfully, I felt control returning to my body. Not full control. The wires were still there, still connected. But I could move my arms, turn my head, open my mouth. For the first time in days, I could speak. "Help," I whispered, and the sound was beautiful. The rescue team heard me and rushed over. The bearded man knelt down beside me. "Dr. Storm, you're okay." "What happened here? What are those wires?" I looked at him, then at the others gathered around me. Some of them already had that distant look in their eyes that meant the silence was working on them. "Listen to me," I said, my voice getting stronger. "This place is dangerous, more dangerous than you can imagine. You need to leave, now." "We're not leaving without you." "Yes, you are." I took a shaky breath. "Because if you don't, you'll end up like me, like all the others." I told them everything. About the silence that fed on sound, about the network that connected sites all over the world, about the people in the cavern who had been trapped here for over a century. As I spoke, I felt the wires in my body getting warm, then hot. The silence was giving me this chance, but it was costing me everything. "You have to tell everyone," I said. "Put up warnings, block off the area, whatever it takes. Don't let anyone else come here." "What about you?" asked one of the women. I smiled, though I felt tears running down my face. "I made a deal. I stay, and it doesn't spread. This ends here." The bearded man shook his head. "We can't just leave. You can, and you will," I said firmly. "John, isn't it? You have a daughter. Sarah has 2 kids. Mike just got engaged. You all have people waiting for you. Don't make them go through what I put my team through." They wanted to argue, but I could see the fear in their eyes. They knew I was right. "There's one more thing," I said. "My equipment. Some of it is still recording. Take the hard drives, the memory cards, everything. Let people hear what this place really is." They gathered up what they could carry and loaded it into their trucks. Before they left, John came back to talk to me one more time. "Will you be okay?" I looked around at the amphitheater, at Jennifer standing motionless in the center, at the wires now glowing visibly under my skin. "I'll be at peace," I said. Finally. They drove away just as the sun was setting. I watched their lights disappear into the desert, and for the first time since I'd arrived, I felt hope. Maybe they would listen. Maybe they would warn others. Maybe this cycle would finally end. As night fell, I felt my voice fading again. The silence had kept its bargain. I'd been able to send the message. Now I would keep mine. I walked to the center of the amphitheater and stood next to Jennifer. The wires pulled me into position, and I felt my consciousness starting to merge with the network, but something was different. Instead of the hungry, desperate whispers I'd been hearing, there was calm. The silence had gotten what it wanted. A guardian who chose to stay instead of being forced. I could hear everything now. Conversations from around the world, music from distant places, the voices of everyone who had ever been absorbed by sights like this one. But instead of chaos, it was like an enormous, complex symphony, and I was the conductor. The ringing in my ears was completely gone. The guilt I'd carried for 3 years was gone too. Even the loneliness was fading, replaced by connection to something vast and eternal. 6 months later, I felt vehicles approaching again. My whole body went tense. Had the message not worked? But these weren't rescue teams. They were military. Vehicles, construction equipment, scientists in protective gear. They set up a perimeter around the amphitheater, posted warning signs, began building a fence. One of the scientists had a recording device. As she set it up near the edge of the Silent zone, I heard my own voice playing back. This place is dangerous, more dangerous than you can imagine. They'd listened. The area was being sealed off, marked as hazardous, forbidden to civilians. I relaxed and felt the network settle around me like a comfortable blanket. The endless hunger was satisfied. The silence had enough voices now, enough sounds. It didn't need to grow anymore, and I had kept my promise. No more people would disappear. No more families would lose their loved ones to this place. Sometimes, late at night, when the desert is completely still, I can hear new sounds in the distance. Cars passing on the highway, planes flying overhead, life continuing in the world. Beyond this place, I can't go back to that world. The wires are part of me now, connecting me to this ancient network of stone and silence. But I'm not sad anymore. I found what I came looking for. Perfect peace, perfect quiet, and the knowledge that I saved everyone else from finding it too. The only sound I hear now is the wind moving through the rocks, carrying messages between the silent places of the world. And sometimes, very quietly, I sing along. After all, every symphony needs a human voice. My name is Diana Storm, and I used to be an acoustic engineer. That means I studied sounds, how they travel, how they bounce, how they can hurt you. I wish I had never learned that last part. 3 years ago, I made a terrible mistake. I was testing some military sound weapons for the government. They wanted to know if we could use sound to stop enemies without killing them. But something went wrong during the test. The machine made a sound so loud and sharp that it damaged everyone's ears. My whole team ended up with hearing problems. Some people lost their hearing completely. The worst part was what happened to me. I got something called tinnitus. It's like having a bell ringing in your ears all the time, except no one else can hear it. Imagine trying to sleep when someone is playing a high-pitched whistle right next to your head. That's what every day became like for me. I couldn't work anymore. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't think straight. The doctors said there was no cure. They gave me pills and played white noise machines, but nothing helped. The ringing just got louder and louder until I had what people call a nervous breakdown. That's how I ended up here, in the middle of the Nevada desert, 100 miles from the nearest town. I read about this place in an old book. It's called a natural amphitheater, basically a circle of rocks that makes sounds behave in strange ways. The book said it had impossible acoustics. Perfect for someone like me who needed to understand sound better. I brought all my equipment in a rented truck. Sound meters, recording devices, computers, everything I needed to study how sound works in this weird place. Maybe if I understood sound better, I could figure out how to fix my ears. The drive took 6 hours on dirt roads that barely counted as roads. When I finally saw the rock formation, I understood why this place was special. It looked like a giant bowl carved into the desert floor. Red and orange rocks rose up in perfect circles, creating natural walls that seemed to go on forever. I set up my camp right in the center. The rocks blocked most of the desert wind, making it surprisingly quiet. As I unpacked my equipment, something amazing happened. For the first time in 3 years, the ringing in my ears stopped. Just for a few seconds, but it stopped. I almost cried. I sat down on a rock and listened to actual silence. Real silence. Not the fake kind you get when you plug your ears, but true, peaceful quiet. It was like being given a glass of water after. Walking through the desert for days. Over the next few days, I set up my equipment carefully. I placed microphones all around the circle of rocks. I connected cables and tested recording devices. The computers showed me graphs of every sound. The wind, my footsteps, even my heartbeat. The rocks here were amazing. When I clapped my hands, the sound bounced back and forth between the walls for almost 10 seconds. When I shouted, my voice came back to me changed, deeper and stranger. It was like the rocks were playing with the sounds, twisting them into new shapes. Best of all, my tinnitus got better. Not gone, but quieter. During the day, when I was busy with my work, I sometimes forgot about the ringing completely. At night, when the desert got really quiet, I could actually sleep without taking pills. I started keeping an audio diary, talking into my recorder every day. Day 1 in the amphitheater, I said. The acoustics here are unlike anything in the textbooks. Sound behaves differently. It's like the rocks are alive and listening. I felt good for the first time in years. I had found my perfect laboratory, a place where I could study sound without anyone bothering me, a place where my broken ears could finally get some rest. I should have known it was too good to be true. By day 6, I noticed something odd. My equipment was picking up sounds that weren't there, little blips on the recordings that happened when I was completely quiet. At first, I thought it was just equipment problems, old cables maybe, or interference from the rocks. But as I listened more carefully, the sounds seemed almost like whispers, very quiet but there, like someone was standing just behind me, trying to get my attention. I checked all my equipment twice. Everything was working perfectly. The sounds were real. Someone or something was making noise in my perfect silent desert. That's when I started to realize that maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. On day 7, things got weird. I woke up early and checked my recording equipment like I did every morning. The computer had been recording all night while I slept. Usually the graphs showed normal desert sounds, wind through the rocks, maybe a coyote in the distance. But that morning, the screen showed something strange. At exactly 3:17 a.m., all my microphones had picked up a sound, a clear human voice saying my name, Diana, just like that. Clear as day. I listened to the recording over and over. It was definitely my name, but I had been asleep at 3:17. There was no one else for 100 miles. The voice didn't sound like mine either. It was deeper, older. I tried to explain it away. Maybe it was wind through the rocks that just sounded like my name. Desert wind can make weird noises, but deep down, I knew what I heard. Someone had called my name in the middle of the night. Over the next few days, stranger things happened. My equipment started recording conversations that I never had. I would play back the recordings and hear myself talking to someone, but I remembered being completely alone. On day 9, I heard myself say, "Yes, I understand. The ringing will stop if I listen." I never said those words. I was sure of it. On day 11, the microphones picked up footsteps walking around my camp at 2 a.m. Slow, careful steps in the sand. But when I got up to look, there were no footprints anywhere. The weirdest part was that my tinnitus kept getting better. The ringing in my ears was almost gone now. For the first time in 3 years, I could hear the world clearly. Birds singing, wind blowing, my own heartbeat. It was beautiful. But the sounds on my recordings kept getting stranger. On day 13, I recorded an echo before I made the original sound. I clapped my hands, and the recording showed the echo happening 2 seconds before the clap. That's impossible. Sound can't travel backwards in time. I started talking to my recorder every night, trying to keep track of what was real. Day 14, I said. The equipment is working fine. I've checked it a dozen times, but it's recording things that can't be happening. I played back that recording the next morning. After my voice, there was another voice. Quiet, but clear. She's starting to understand. I nearly dropped the recorder. The voice was right there on the tape, but I hadn't heard it when I was speaking. It was like someone had been standing right next to me, whispering. On day 16, I tried an experiment. I set up cameras along with the microphones. Maybe I could see what was making these sounds. The next morning, I watched the video from the night before. At 1:45 a.m., I saw myself get up and walk to the center of the rock circle. Then I saw myself have a conversation with empty air. I was nodding, shaking my head, pointing at different rocks. On the video, I looked like I was talking to a real person. but there was no one there. I fast-forwarded through the whole night. I had gotten up 4 more times to have conversations with nothing. Each time, I went back to my tent and slept peacefully. I had no memory of any of it. That's when the fear really started. Not panic, just a quiet, cold feeling in my stomach. Something was wrong here. Really wrong. But my ears felt so good. The silence was so perfect during the day. And at night, at night I slept better than I had in years. On day 18, I found something that made my blood run cold. While checking my equipment, I discovered that one of my microphones had been moved during the night. It was now pointing in a different direction, aimed at an area between 2 large rocks. I walked over to look at what the microphone was pointing. There, carved into the rock face, were words. Old words, worn by wind and time, but still readable. The silence calls to those who suffer from sound. Below that, in fresher carving, someone had scratched a date, 1893. And below that, in even, newer carving was my name, Diana. I stood there staring at the rock, my mouth dry as dust. The carving of my name looked fresh, like someone had done it just last night, but I hadn't carved it. I was sure of that, wasn't I? I wasn't alone anymore. On day 19, a jeep came bouncing across the desert. I heard it from miles away, which was strange because my equipment showed the engine was completely silent on the recordings, but I could hear it just fine. The driver was Marcus O'Keefe, a geology professor from the university. He said he'd gotten my research proposal and wanted to see the rock formation for himself. He was a nice man, maybe 50 years old, with kind eyes and a big smile. "This place is incredible," he said, looking around at the rocks. "I can see why you wanted to study the acoustics here." I showed him my equipment and some of the strange recordings. He listened carefully, nodding along, but when I played the recording of my name being called, he tilted his head. "I don't hear anything," he said. "Are you sure there's a voice there?" I played it again, clear as day, someone saying Diana, but Marcus just shrugged. "Maybe it's just wind," he said. "Desert wind can play tricks on your ears." That night, Marcus set up his tent near mine. We sat by a small campfire and talked about rocks and sound and desert life. It felt good to have another person around, normal and safe. But when I checked my recordings the next morning, they showed we had been silent all evening. The microphones picked up no conversation, no fire crackling, no voices at all. According to my equipment, we had sat in complete silence for 3 hours. Marcus stayed for 3 more days. During the day, we explored the rock formations together. He took samples and measurements while I recorded how our voices echoed differently in various spots. He noticed something I had missed. "Look at this," he said, pointing to marks on the ground. "These rocks weren't always in this position. Someone moved them, recently too." The rocks around the camp had been arranged in a perfect circle, but the marks in the sand showed they had been dragged into place. The arrangement made the acoustics even stranger, creating pockets where sound seemed to disappear completely. On day 22, Marcus found something that scared him. Behind one of the larger rocks, hidden from view, he discovered what looked like old camping equipment. A canvas tent, rotten with age, metal cans that had rusted through, and bones, human bones. "We need to call the police," Marcus said, his voice shaky. But we had no phone signal. The nearest town was 100 miles away, and something strange was happening to Marcus. That evening he started complaining about his ears. "They feel weird," he said, touching the sides of his head, "like there's pressure inside them." I watched him carefully. During dinner, he would stop talking mid-sentence and tilt his head, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. "Do you hear that?" he asked. "Hear what?" He looked confused. The calling. Someone's calling. But I heard nothing except the normal desert wind. On day 24, Marcus didn't come out of his tent in the morning. I called his name but got no answer. The silence around his tent felt thick and heavy, like trying to breathe underwater. Found him inside, sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed. At first, I thought he was sleeping. Then I noticed something was wrong with his ears. They were bleeding, but the blood had dried and turned dark. "Marcus," I whispered. He didn't move. I touched his shoulder gently, and he fell over like a statue. His eyes were open but empty, and when I looked closer, I saw something that made me scream. His eardrums had burst, both of them. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that he was still breathing, but he made no sound when he breathed, no air going in or out. His chest moved up and down, but in complete silence. I checked for a pulse. His heart was beating, but I couldn't hear it, even when I put my ear to his chest. It was like the sound of his heartbeat had been stolen. I tried to wake him up, shaking him and shouting his name, but even my shouting made no noise when I got close to him. It was as if there was a bubble of silence around his body that swallowed up any sound. Then, as I watched in horror, he stopped breathing just like that. No struggle, no noise. One moment he was breathing silently, the next moment he wasn't breathing at all. Marcus O'Keefe died in perfect silence. I sat outside his tent for hours, trying to understand what had happened. I had seen dead people before, but never like this. Never surrounded by this thick, heavy quiet that seemed to push against my ears. That night I barely slept. Every few minutes I would check to make sure I could still make sounds. I snapped my fingers, hummed songs, even talked to myself just to hear my own voice. But sometimes, when I listened to the recordings the next day, my voice wasn't there either. On day 25, I knew I had to leave and get help. But when I tried to start my truck, the engine wouldn't make any noise. I could see it running. The exhaust came out, the dashboard lights worked, but it was completely silent. I was trapped in a place where sound was slowly disappearing. And the strange thing was, my tinnitus was completely gone now. My ears felt perfectly clear and healthy. I had never heard silence so perfectly in my life, and that terrified me more than anything. I buried Marcus behind the big rocks, next to the old bones we had found. It took me all day to dig the hole in the hard desert ground. The whole time, I talked to myself just to make sure I could still make sound. Day 26, I said into my recorder. Marcus is dead. I don't know what killed him, but I'm going to find out. But when I played back the recording, something was wrong. My voice sounded different, smaller, like it was coming from very far away. Over the next few days, I noticed that sounds were disappearing from my camp. First, little things. The beeping of my equipment stopped working. My watch stopped ticking. When I dropped a metal cup, it hit the ground without making any noise. Then bigger sounds started going away. On day 28, I couldn't hear my own footsteps anymore. I could feel my feet hitting the ground, but they made no sound. I walked around the camp, stomping as hard as I could, but it was like walking on clouds. The silence was growing. I started making lists of what sounds I could still hear and what sounds had gone quiet. I could still hear my voice, but it got quieter every day. I could still hear the wind, but only sometimes. The fire still crackled, but softer than before. My equipment showed something impossible. According to the sound meters, there were places in the camp where no sound existed at all. Not quiet, not soft. Actually, no sound. Places where the air itself couldn't carry sound waves. I called them dead zones. On day 30, while checking my recordings, I heard something that made my skin crawl. It was my own voice, but I was having a conversation I didn't remember. Yes, my voice said on the recording. I understand now. You want to help me. Then another voice, deeper and older. The ringing in your ears was caused by too much sound. We can take all sound away, forever. That would be wonderful, my voice replied. I had no memory of this conversation. But according to the timestamp, it had happened while I was awake, in the middle of the day. The dead zones started growing bigger. By day 32, there was a circle about 10 feet wide where no sound could exist. If I walked into it, even my heartbeat went silent. My breathing made no noise. It was like being underwater, but worse. In the dead zone, I couldn't even think properly. My thoughts usually had a sound to them, like talking to myself inside my head, but in the dead zone, even my thoughts went quiet. The strange thing was, it felt peaceful. Really peaceful. For those few moments in the dead zone, my mind was completely calm. No worries, no fear, no pain, just perfect, beautiful silence. I started spending more time there. On day 35, I woke up and found myself sleeping in the middle of the dead zone. I had no memory of moving my sleeping bag there, but I had slept better than I had in years. Deep, dreamless sleep in perfect quiet. My equipment showed that I had been sleepwalking again. Almost every night now, I would get up and walk around the camp, sometimes for hours, but I never remembered any of it. The recordings from those nights were the strangest yet. I could hear myself talking, but the words didn't make sense. "The network is almost ready," my voice said one night. "How many others?" asked the deeper voice. "Thousands," I replied. "All across the world, all the quiet places where sound goes." To die, I didn't understand what we were talking about, but it scared me. On day 37, something new started happening. I began hearing sounds that my equipment couldn't record. Voices whispering my name, footsteps in the sand, music that seemed to come from inside the rocks themselves. But when I checked the recordings, there was nothing there. The opposite was also happening. My equipment would record sounds that I couldn't hear. Conversations in languages I didn't recognize. Mechanical noises like gears turning. And always, underneath everything, a low humming sound, like electricity running through wires. I was losing track of what was real and what wasn't. On day 38, I discovered something terrible. While organizing my equipment, I found a box of recording devices that I didn't remember buying. They were different from my usual gear, smaller, more advanced, and they seemed to be growing out of the ground like metal plants. When I touched one, it felt warm, alive. I tried to pull it out of the ground, but it was connected to something underneath, cables that went down into the earth like roots. When I followed the cables, I found they led to the dead zone, all of them connected to the dead zone. That night, I had my clearest conversation yet with whatever was sharing this place with me. "Diana," the voice said. It was so clear now, like someone standing right next to me. "You came here to stop the ringing in your ears." "Yes," I said. I could hear my own voice responding even though I didn't remember deciding to speak. "We can help you. We can take away all sound forever. No more pain, no more noise, no more confusion. Just peace." "But people need sound," I said. "Do they? You've lived here for weeks without much sound. Aren't you happier?" I thought about it. I was happier. The constant noise in my head was gone. The stress of the outside world had disappeared. Here in the desert, with less and less sound each day, I felt more peaceful than I had in years. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "Help us grow. Help us spread the silence to other places. There are people like you all over the world, people who are hurt by too much sound. We can help them all." On day 40, I understood. This place wasn't just taking sound away. It was collecting it, storing it somewhere, and it wanted me to help it spread to other places. The dead zone was now 30 feet across. Inside it, I felt completely calm. Outside it, I felt anxious and worried. I was starting to prefer the silence. And that's when I realized I was in real trouble. On day 41, I wasn't alone again. A young man named Paul Kim arrived in a small helicopter. He was a research assistant from the university, sent to check on Marcus and me after we'd missed our scheduled radio calls. I was happy to see him, but also terrified. I tried to warn him about what was happening here, but when I spoke, my voice was so quiet he had to lean in close to hear me. "You need to leave," I whispered. "This place is dangerous." Paul looked around at my equipment and the dead zone. "Dr. Storm, are you feeling okay? You look—" He paused, searching for words. "You look different." I caught my reflection in his sunglasses. He was right. My skin was pale, almost grey. My eyes looked hollow. I had lost a lot of weight without noticing, but the worst change was my ears. The skin around them had a strange crystalline look, like tiny pieces of glass were growing under the surface. "How long have you been alone out here?" Paul asked. "Since Marcus died," I said. But my voice was so quiet now that Paul couldn't hear me at all. He set up his tent near mine, even though I tried to gesture for him to stay away from the dead zone. That night, we sat by the fire while I wrote him notes to explain what had been happening. Paul read my notes with growing concern. "Dr. Storm, I think you might be suffering from isolation stress. These things you're describing, they're not possible." I showed him my recordings, but when we played them back, they were all empty. Hours and hours of silence. Even the conversations I remembered having with the entity were gone. "See," Paul said gently, "there's nothing there. I think you've been alone too long." But I knew what I had experienced. The problem was, I couldn't prove it anymore. On day 43, Paul started changing. It began with headaches. He complained that his ears felt like they were full of pressure. I tried to warn him, but my voice had gotten so weak that he couldn't hear me even when I shouted. By day 45, Paul was having the same problems Marcus had. He would stop mid-conversation and tilt his head, listening to something I couldn't hear. "Do you hear that calling?" he asked me. I shook my head, but I was lying. I could hear it now too. A voice that seemed to come from the rocks themselves, calling our names softly, lovingly. Paul's ears started bleeding on day 46. I tried to get him to leave, shaking him and pointing at his helicopter. But he just smiled peacefully and walked into the dead zone. Once he was inside, I couldn't hear him at all. He could move his mouth like he was talking, but no sound came out. When he came out of the dead zone, he looked different, calmer. His eyes had the same hollow look mine had developed. That night I found him having a conversation with the air, just like I had been doing. But this time, I could hear both sides of the conversation. "The pain will stop," the voice told him. "All you have to do is let go of sound." "But I need sound for my work," Paul said. "Work? What work?" "You are here to join the network, to help us grow." I watched Paul nod slowly. "Yes, I understand now." On day 48, I woke up to find Paul sitting in the center of the dead zone with his eyes closed. Like Marcus, he was breathing but making no sound at all. But unlike Marcus, Paul was still alive. His chest moved up and down in perfect silence. When I touched his shoulder, he smiled at me. His lips moved like he was saying something, but no, words came out. I tried to drag him out of the dead zone, but he was too heavy. More importantly, when I grabbed his arms, something strange happened. My equipment started beeping and flashing. The sound meters showed that Paul was somehow connected to the underground cables. He had become part of the system. On day 50, Paul died just like Marcus. One moment he was breathing silently, the next moment he stopped. But his body didn't decay. It just sat there, perfectly preserved in the dead zone silence. That night, I had my longest conversation yet with the entity. "Diana," it said, "you understand now, don't you?" "You're killing people," I said. My voice was barely a whisper. "We're not killing them. We're freeing them from the pain of sound. Look at yourself. Aren't you better now? No more ringing in your ears. No more noise to hurt you." I had to admit it was right. I felt peaceful here, calm in a way I hadn't felt since before the accident. "But what about the outside world?" I asked. "The outside world is full of people like you." People hurt by sound. We can help them all. The network is almost ready. I looked around at my equipment. Half of it was no longer mine. Strange devices had grown up from the ground, connecting to my original gear. Cables ran everywhere like veins under the sand. On day 51, I made a discovery that changed everything. While exploring the rocks, I found a cave I hadn't seen before. Inside were old journals left by other visitors to this place over the years. The first journal was from 1893, a group of surveyors who came to map the area. They wrote about strange acoustic properties and sounds that had no source. The last entry said, "The desert calls to us, we must answer." Another journal from 1924. A photographer who came to take pictures. He wrote about losing his hearing gradually, then finding perfect peace in silence, journal after journal, going back over 100 years, all telling the same story. People came here with hearing problems. The place cured them. Then it changed them. Then they disappeared. But they didn't really disappear. In the back of the cave, I found something that made my blood run cold. Bodies, dozens of them, all sitting peacefully with their eyes closed, perfectly preserved, all with the same crystalline growth around their ears that I was developing. They were all still breathing, silently. On day 52, I realized the truth. This place collected people who were sensitive to sound. It promised to cure them, then slowly absorbed them into its network. We became living amplifiers for its power to spread silence to the world. And the worst part, I was starting to want it. The thought of going back to the noisy world outside filled me with dread. Here, in the growing silence, I felt perfect, content. Home. I walked into the dead zone and sat down next to Paul's body. The silence wrapped around me like a warm blanket. For the first time in years, my mind was completely quiet. I understood now why the others had chosen to stay. The only question left was whether I would fight this feeling or give in to it like they had. As I sat there in perfect silence, I realized I might not have a choice anymore. On day 53, I heard helicopters coming. The sound was far away, but getting closer. A rescue team, probably sent when Paul didn't return. I should have been happy. Instead, I felt panic. The noise of the helicopters hurt my ears. After weeks of silence, any loud sound felt like needles in my brain. I covered my ears and ran deeper, into the dead zone where it was quiet. But as soon as I thought about being rescued, the entity spoke to me. "They will take you away from here," it said, "back to the noisy world, back to the ringing in your ears." "Maybe that's what I need," whispered. "Is it? Listen to yourself, Diana. Can you even speak normally anymore?" I tried to say my name out loud. My voice came out as barely a breath. The crystalline growth around my ears had spread down my neck. When I touched my throat, it felt hard and strange. The helicopters landed outside the rock formation. I could hear people shouting, calling my name and Paul's name. Their voices sounded impossibly loud after so much silence. I wanted to run to them, but I also wanted to hide. "They won't understand," the entity said. "They'll think you're crazy. They'll put you in a hospital with machines that beep and buzz all day. They'll never believe what happened here." I knew it was right. How could I explain Paul sitting preserved in the dead zone? How could I explain equipment growing from the ground? How could I explain that I could barely speak anymore? On day 54, the rescue team found my camp. There were 4 of them. 2 pilots, a medic, and a woman who said she was Paul's sister, Jennifer. They looked around at my equipment and the dead zone with confused expressions. "Dr. Storm?" Jennifer called. "Where are you? Where's Paul?" I stepped out from behind the rocks. They all stared at me with shock. I must have looked terrible. Grey skin, hollow eyes, and the crystal growths around my ears that I couldn't hide anymore. "My God," the medic said. "What happened to you?" I tried to speak, but only a whisper came out. I pointed toward the dead zone where Paul's body sat. They followed me there. When they saw Paul sitting peacefully with his eyes closed, Jennifer ran to him. "Paul!" she shouted, shaking his shoulders. "Wake up!" But when they tried to check his pulse, something strange happened. The rescue team stopped talking. One by one, they stood up and looked around with confused expressions. "Did anyone else hear that?" one of the pilots asked. "Hear what?" Jennifer said. "Someone calling my name?" I watched in horror as the same thing that happened to Marcus and Paul started happening to them. They began tilting their heads, listening to sounds only they could hear. The entity was trying to recruit them too. On day 55, I made a choice. I couldn't let these people become like Paul and Marcus. I had to warn them, even if they didn't believe me. I sat down with a notebook and wrote everything down, every detail about what had happened here. When I showed them the notebook, they read it with growing alarm. "Dr. Storm," the medic said gently, "I think you've been through a trauma. Isolation can cause hallucinations, memory problems. We need to get you to a hospital." But Jennifer believed me. Maybe because she could see her brother sitting there, breathing but not breathing, alive but not alive. "We need to leave," she said. "All of us, right now." The others agreed, but when we tried to walk to the helicopters, we found that the dead zone had grown. It now covered the entire area between our camp and where they had landed. We had to walk through it to escape. One by one, we entered the silent zone. Inside, I watched each of them change. Their expressions became peaceful. Their eyes got that hollow look. They moved slowly, like they were walking underwater. By the time we reached the helicopters, 2 of the pilots were having conversations with empty air. On day 56, we tried to leave. Jennifer started the helicopter engine. It ran, but made no sound at all. The blades spun silently. According to all the instruments, everything was working perfectly, but it was completely quiet. "This is impossible," she said, but her voice was getting quieter too. We tried the other helicopter. Same thing. Engines running, but no noise. We were trapped. That night I made a desperate decision. I gathered all my original equipment, the gear I had brought with me, not the strange devices that had grown from the ground. I set up one final recording. "My name is Diana Storm," I said into the microphone. "If anyone finds this, do not come to this place. Do not try to rescue anyone here. The silence is alive. It feeds on sound and converts people into part of its network." But when I played the recording back, my voice was gone. The entity had taken it. On day 58, I did something I thought I'd never do. I destroyed my equipment. I smashed every speaker, every microphone, every recording device. With each piece I broke, a loud, sharp sound echoed through the desert. The noise hurt my ears terribly, but it was the only way to create enough sound to break through the silence. The entity screamed, not with a voice, but with a feeling that went through my whole body, pain and anger and loss. For just a moment, the dead zone shrank. The rescue team snapped out of their trance. "Run!" I tried to shout, but my voice was barely a whisper. Jennifer understood. She grabbed the others and dragged them toward the helicopters. This time, the engines made noise. Loud, beautiful, mechanical noise. They took off just as the dead zone began to grow again, but I didn't go with them. On day 60, I realized why I had stayed behind. The crystalline growth had spread all over my body now. I could barely move. My voice was completely gone. I couldn't even think in words anymore. My thoughts came as images and feelings. I was becoming part of the network. The entity spoke to me one last time. "You fought well, Diana, but you belong here now. You'll help us reach other places where sound causes pain, other people like you who need our help." I wanted to resist, but the silence was so peaceful, so perfect. All the pain and noise and confusion of the world was gone. On day 65, I stopped fighting. I walked into the center of the dead zone and sat down next to Paul and Marcus. My breathing became silent. My heartbeat disappeared. My thoughts grew quiet and still, but I didn't die. I became something else, a guardian of the silence, a collector of wounded sounds. Sometimes people still come to this place, scientists and tourists and people who have heard the stories. They always have. Problems with sound, tinnitus, hearing damage, sensitivity to noise. And I help the silence call to them because I understand now. The world is too loud. There's too much noise, too much pain, too much chaos. Here in the desert, in the perfect quiet, there is peace. If you're reading this, if you've found this recording somehow, please understand, I'm not trapped here. I chose this. The silence chose me. And maybe if you're struggling with sound like I was, it will choose you too. Listen carefully. Can you hear it calling your name? My name is Eleanor Whitmore, and I need to tell you what happened to me in the woods. I was a nurse once. I helped sick people get better. But then I did something terrible, and everything changed. I got addicted to medicine. Not the kind you take when you have a cold. Strong medicine that made me feel sleepy and far away. I started taking it from the hospital where I worked. Just a little bit at first, but then more and more. One night I was so confused from the drugs that I made a big mistake. I gave the wrong medicine to 3 little kids. Their names were Tommy, Maria, and Joseph. They were supposed to get better and go home. Instead, they died because of what I did. Everyone found out. The police came to my house. The newspapers wrote stories calling me a killer. I lost my job and couldn't be a nurse anymore. The families of those children were so angry, and they had every right to be. I couldn't stay in town anymore. Everyone looked at me like I was a monster, so I packed my car and drove north, far away from everyone I had hurt. I drove until I found an old camp in the woods by a frozen lake. The camp used to be for people who cut down trees, but no one had used it for 40 years. There were old wooden buildings covered in snow. The biggest one had rows of beds that looked too much like a hospital. I didn't want to stay there. I picked a small cabin near the lake. It had one room with a fireplace and a tiny kitchen. It wasn't much, but it was enough for someone like me who just wanted to hide. The lake was frozen solid. The ice was so thick you could probably walk across it, but I wasn't going to try. I brought enough food to last all winter. Cans of soup and beans, crackers, coffee. I also brought matches, warm blankets, and an old gun that I didn't know how to use. I brought something else too, my medical bag. I probably should have thrown it away, but I couldn't. Maybe I thought I might need it someday. The first few days were very quiet. So quiet that my ears started ringing. I made myself do the same things every day so I wouldn't go crazy. Wake up, check the fire, eat breakfast, look outside to see what the weather was like. I talked to myself a lot because there was no one else to talk to. Sometimes I pretended I was back at the hospital talking to my patients. How are you feeling? Today, Mrs. Brown, I would say to the empty room. Are you ready for your medicine? It made me feel less alone, but it also made me sad. On my 3rd day at the camp, I found a hurt rabbit outside my door. It was white like the snow, but there was red blood on its fur. One of its back legs was broken and twisted. I couldn't just leave it there to die in the cold. I brought it inside and put it on my kitchen table. My hands were shaking as I opened my medical bag. I hadn't used it since the night those children died. Don't be scared, little rabbit, I said softly. I'm going to help you feel better. I cleaned the blood off its fur and made a tiny splint for its leg, using a small stick and some white bandages. The rabbit didn't try to bite me or run away. It just laid there quietly, like it knew I was trying to help. When I was done, I put the rabbit in a cardboard box next to the fireplace where it would be warm. That's when I noticed something weird. While I was working on the rabbit, my hands hadn't shaken at all. They were steady and sure, just like they used to be before I started taking drugs, before everything went wrong. I should have been happy that my hands were steady again. But instead, I felt scared. What if having steady hands made me want to try fixing things again? What if I hurt something else? The rabbit got better really fast, faster than it should have. In just a few days, it was hopping around my cabin like nothing had ever been wrong with it. But when I opened the door to let it go back to the woods, it wouldn't leave. It just sat there looking at me with its dark eyes. go on," I said. "You're all better now. You can go home." But the rabbit wouldn't move. It kept staring at me like it was waiting for something. That night, I heard noises outside, not the wind or snow falling from trees. It sounded like something was walking around my cabin, going in circles. I looked out the window but couldn't see anything except the dark shapes of trees. When I woke up the next morning, I found something that made my heart beat fast and scared. Outside my door, someone had put small animal bones in the snow. They weren't scattered around like they would be if a wolf had eaten something. These bones were arranged in a careful pattern. I stared at them for a long time. The pattern looked familiar, but I couldn't remember where I had seen it before. It made me feel sick to my stomach. Finally, I kicked the bones away and went back inside my cabin. But as I closed the door, I heard a sound that made me freeze. The soft, clicking noise of bones moving against each other like invisible hands were putting them back where they belonged. The bones kept coming back. Every morning for the next week, I found them outside my door, always in the same spot, always, arranged in the same pattern. I would kick them away, but by the next morning they were back. I started to think maybe it was the wind moving them around, or maybe some animal was playing with them. Animals do strange things sometimes. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The bones were always placed too carefully, too neat. The rabbit still wouldn't leave. It followed me around the cabin like a pet dog. When I sat by the fire, it sat next to me. When I cooked dinner, it watched from under the table. Its dark eyes never left me alone. "What do you want?" I asked it one day. Of course, it didn't answer, just kept staring. On my 10th day at the camp, I found something new with the bones. Bigger bones, longer ones. They were arranged in a different pattern this time. When I looked at them closely, they reminded me of something from nursing school, something I learned about the human body. It looked like the bones were showing me. Our rib cage fits together. My hands started shaking as I stared at them. I had seen this exact picture in my medical books years ago. But how could animal bones make the same shape? And who was putting them there? I ran back into my cabin and locked the door. I even pushed a chair in front of it. But locks and chairs couldn't keep out the feeling that something was watching me. That afternoon, I tried to use my radio. I had brought it to listen to music and news from the outside world. But when I turned it on, all I heard was static. White noise that hurt my ears. Then through the static I heard something that made my blood turn cold. Singing. Soft, gentle singing. Like a lullaby you might sing to a baby. But the words weren't in English. They sounded older, different, and the melody was sad, like a song you sing when someone dies. I turned the radio off quickly. My hands were shaking again. The singing stopped, but I could still hear it in my head for hours afterward. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those bone patterns. My brain kept trying to remember where else I had seen them. It was like having a word on the tip of your tongue, but not being able to say it. Around midnight, I heard footsteps outside. Slow, careful footsteps walking around my cabin. They sounded too heavy to be an animal. But who would be out here in the middle of nowhere, in the freezing cold? I got up and looked out the window. The moon was bright and I could see the snow clearly. But I didn't see anyone walking around. The footsteps kept going, though. Step, step, step. Around and around my cabin. I grabbed the rifle from the corner, even though I didn't know how to use it. Holding it made me feel a little braver. "Who's there?" I called out. "I have a gun." The footsteps stopped. Everything went quiet. Even the wind stopped blowing. The silence was so complete it hurt my ears. Then I heard something that made me drop the rifle. A voice, clear as day, coming from right outside my door. Eleanor. It was a man's voice, calm and friendly, like someone I should know. "Eleanor, we know you're in there. We need your help." My heart was beating so fast I thought it might explode. Who was we? How did they know my name? "Please," the voice continued, "we're hurt. We need a nurse." Something inside me wanted to open the door. the part of me that used to help sick people, the part that couldn't stand to see others in pain. But I remembered what happened the last time I tried to help those 3 children, Tommy, Maria, and Joseph. Go away, I whispered. I can't help anyone. Yes, you can, the voice said. Your hands are steady now. We saw you fix the rabbit. You're getting better. How did they know? About the rabbit? Had someone been watching me? We're not going anywhere, Eleanor. We'll wait for you. We have all the time in the world. I stayed awake all night listening, but I never heard the footsteps leave. And in the morning, when I finally looked outside, I found something that made me want to scream. The bone pattern had changed again. This time, it looked exactly like a human spine, each bone in perfect order, just like in the diagrams I had memorized in nursing school. And next to the spine, scratched into the snow, were 3 words: help us heal. I stared at those words for a long time. Part of me wanted to run into the woods and never come back. But another part of me, the part that used to be a nurse, whispered that maybe I could help. Maybe this was my chance to make up for what I had done. Maybe I could save someone this time. I went back inside and made coffee with shaking hands. The rabbit watched me from its spot by the fireplace. Its black eyes seemed to say the same thing as the voice outside. We need you, Eleanor. We need your help. But I had learned not to trust myself. Not after what happened to Tommy, Maria, and Joseph. So I stayed inside and waited for night to come again, wondering who would be walking around my cabin when the sun went down. 2 weeks passed. The voices came every night now, always after midnight. Sometimes it was just one voice. Sometimes it sounded like many people talking at once. They all said the same thing. Eleanor, we need help. We're hurt. Please open the door. I stopped answering them. I learned to put pillows over my ears and wait for morning. But they were always there, walking around my cabin, whispering my name. The bone patterns were getting bigger too, more complex. Every day I found new arrangements that looked like pictures from my old medical books, a heart, a brain, hands and feet, all made from small animal bones. I started taking pictures of them with my old camera before I kicked them away. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted proof that I wasn't going crazy. The rabbit had grown fat and lazy. It didn't even try to go outside anymore, just sat by the fire all day, watching me with those dark eyes. Sometimes I caught myself talking to it like it was a real patient. How are you feeling today? I would ask. Any pain in that leg? The rabbit never answered, of course, but sometimes it tilted its head like it was listening. On my 15th day at the camp, everything changed. I was chopping wood behind my cabin when I saw someone walking toward me through the trees. A real person this time, not just a voice in the dark. It was a man in a park ranger uniform. He was tall and young, maybe 30 years old. He looked cold and tired, like he'd been walking for a long time. Ma'am, he called out when he saw me, are you all right? We've been looking for you. Looking for me? Who was we? Had someone reported me missing? I'm fine, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Just camping. He came closer, and I could see his name tag, Tom Erickson. His face was friendly but worried. This isn't really a camping area, he said, and it's pretty dangerous out here alone. We had reports of strange noises coming from this direction, people getting scared. Strange noises. Had other people heard the voices too? I haven't heard anything strange, I lied. Tom looked around at the old buildings covered in snow. His eyes stopped at the pile of kicked-away bones near my door. What's all that? He asked. Nothing, I said quickly. Just animal bones. Wolves, probably. He walked over and knelt down to look at them. His face got a confused expression. These are arranged in a pattern, he said. Animals don't do this. My heart started beating faster. Maybe kids came by and were playing with them. Kids? Out here? Ma'am, we're 40 miles from the nearest road. Tom stood up and looked at me carefully. I could see him taking in my dirty clothes, my shaking hands, the dark circles under my eyes. "When's the last time you ate a real meal?" he asked gently. I couldn't remember. "I eat every day." "What about talking to other people? When did you last have a conversation with someone?" I almost said every night, but caught myself. He wouldn't understand about the voices. "I'd like being alone," I said. Tom nodded like he understood. "Can I come inside and warm up? I've been walking for hours." Every part of me wanted to say no. I didn't want anyone in my cabin. It was my safe place. But Tom seemed nice, and he was just doing his job. "Okay," I said, "but just for a little while." We went inside together. Tom stomped the snow off his boots and looked around. The cabin was messy. I hadn't been taking good care of myself lately. Empty cans were piled in the sink. My clothes were scattered everywhere. The rabbit hopped over to Tom and sniffed his boots. "Cute rabbit," he said. "Is it your pet?" "I found it hurt," I said. "Fixed its broken leg." Tom knelt down and gently petted the rabbit. "You did a good job." The leg healed perfectly. Something warm filled my chest. It had been so long since someone said I did something right. I made Tom coffee and we sat by the fire. He told me about his job as a park ranger, about his wife and 2 kids back in town. Normal things that made me remember there was a world outside these woods. "You seem like a nice person," he said after a while. "But living out here alone isn't healthy. You could come back to town with me. There are people who can help." Help. There was that word again. "I don't need help," I said. "I'm better off alone." "Why? What are you running from?" I almost told him everything, about the children, about the morphine, about the voices that came every night. But I stopped myself. He wouldn't understand. "I just want to be left alone," I said. Tom finished his coffee and stood up. "Well, I can't force you to come with me, but I'll be back to check on you in a few days. Make sure you're okay." After he left, I felt more alone than ever. The cabin felt too quiet without his voice. Even the rabbit seemed sad. That night the voices came again, but this time they sounded different, angry. "Why did you let him leave?" they whispered. "He was hurt. We could have helped him. You could have helped him." "He wasn't hurt," I said out loud. "He was fine." "Was he? Are you sure? Maybe he was hurt inside where you couldn't see." I covered my ears with my hands. "Go away." But the voices kept talking. "He'll be back, Eleanor, and next time he'll need your help, your special help." I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about Tom's kind eyes, about his wife and kids waiting for him at home. I hoped he made it back safely. 3 days later, I found him. He was lying face down in the snow about half a mile from my cabin. His park ranger uniform was torn and bloody. At first, I thought maybe he had fallen and hurt himself. Maybe he needed help. I ran over to him and turned him onto his back. Then I saw what had really happened to Tom Erickson. Someone had cut him open very carefully, like a doctor performing surgery. His chest had been opened with clean, precise cuts. His heart was missing, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the surgical instruments lying in the snow next to his body. Instruments from my medical bag. Instruments I didn't remember using. My hands were covered in blood, and I had no memory of how it got there. I buried Tom's body in the snow behind the old bunkhouse. I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't call the police. How could I explain the cuts on his body? How could I explain the blood on my hands? I kept telling myself that I didn't do it, that I couldn't have done it. But the evidence was right there, my surgical tools, my bloody hands, and somewhere deep inside a tiny voice whispered that my hands had never felt steadier. After the burial, I threw my medical bag into the lake, watched it disappear under the ice. But that night, I found it sitting on my kitchen table like nothing had happened. Every tool clean and shiny, ready to be used again. The voices were different now, quieter but more constant. Instead of just coming at night, I heard them during the day too. Whispers that sounded like wind through the trees. "You did good, Eleanor. Clean cuts, steady hands." I didn't do anything, I said to the empty air. The heart was perfect when we took it. No damage at all. We? Who was we? The rabbit watched me argue with invisible people. Sometimes it seemed like it could hear the voices, too. Its ears would twitch, and it would look toward the corners of the room where nothing was there. Days and nights started blending together. I stopped keeping track of time. I stopped eating regular meals. I only left the cabin to use the outhouse and get more firewood. The bone patterns outside my door were getting bigger and more complex. Now they covered an area the size of my whole cabin. They looked like complete human skeletons lying in the snow, but not one skeleton. 3 small ones. Children. I stopped kicking them away. What was the point? They always came back. 2 weeks. After Tom died, another person showed up. I was sitting by the fire talking to the rabbit when I heard someone calling my name. A woman's voice this time, young and scared. Hello. Is anyone there? I need help. I looked out the window and saw a girl walking toward my cabin. She was maybe 25 years old, wearing hiking clothes and carrying a backpack. Her face was red from the cold, and she was limping. My first thought was to hide, to pretend no one was home. But the girl looked really hurt, and the old part of me, the nurse part, couldn't ignore someone in pain. I opened the door. Are you okay? Oh, thank God, she said. I've been lost for hours. I was supposed to meet my boyfriend at the main trail, but I took a wrong turn. My ankle is really messed up. She limped closer, and I could see she was telling the truth. Her left ankle was swollen inside her hiking boot. I'm Sarah, she said. Sarah McKnight. Do you have a phone I could use? No phone, I said, and no car. But I can look at your ankle. The words came out before I could stop them. The nurse in me was still there, even after everything that had happened. Sarah smiled with relief. Are you a doctor? I used to be a nurse, I said. Come inside before you freeze. I helped her into the cabin and sat her down by the fire. The rabbit hopped over to sniff her boots, just like it had done with Tom. Cute rabbit, Sarah said, reaching down to pet it. Something cold went through my stomach. Those were the exact same words Tom had said. I knelt down and carefully took off Sarah's hiking boot. Her ankle was definitely sprained, maybe worse. It was swollen and turning purple. This is going to hurt, I said, as I gently felt around the injury. Sarah winced but didn't pull away. You really know what you're doing. Have you been a nurse for long? Not anymore, I said. I don't practice anymore. I went to get ice from outside to put on her ankle, but when I came back, Sarah was staring at something on my kitchen table, my medical bag. It was open, showing all the gleaming surgical tools. Inside, where did this come from? I asked out loud. I threw this away. Sarah looked at me with confused eyes. What? Nothing, I said quickly, just talking to myself. But now Sarah was looking at me differently, like she was starting to get scared. I wrapped ice in a towel and put it on her ankle. Keep this on for 20 minutes, I said. We sat in silence for a while. Sarah kept glancing toward the door like she was thinking about leaving. Maybe I should try to walk back to the trail, she said. My boyfriend is probably worried. You shouldn't walk on that ankle, I said. You could make it worse. But I can't stay here all night. The voices started whispering again, so soft that only I could hear them. She's hurt, Eleanor, really hurt, more than just her ankle. I shook my head slightly, trying to make them stop. Look closer, look with your nurse eyes. Against my will, I found myself really looking at Sarah, at the pale color of her skin, at the way she was breathing, at the slight tremor in her hands. Sarah, I said slowly, when did you last eat something? This morning, she said, I think. Are you diabetic? She looked surprised. How did you know? But I have my insulin with me. When did you last take it? Sarah thought for a moment. Yesterday? Maybe the day before? I lost track of time in the woods. She was going into diabetic shock. She needed help right away, or she could die, but I couldn't help her. Every time I tried to help someone, they died. I need to give you insulin, I said. I can do it myself, Sarah said, reaching for her backpack, but her hands were shaking too much. She dropped the insulin kit, and it scattered across the floor. Let me help, I said, picking up the pieces. That's when the voices got louder. Yes, Eleanor, help her. Use your steady hands. She needs surgery, not insulin. Cut her open. See what's really wrong. No, I whispered. She just needs insulin. Sarah stared at me. Who are you talking to? I prepared the insulin shot, but my hands started shaking, not from nerves, from fighting against what the voices wanted me to do. Everything will be fine, I said, giving Sarah the injection. But as the needle went into her arm, I heard myself say something else, something I didn't mean to say. This might hurt a little more than usual. Sarah looked at me with wide, frightened eyes. What do you mean? I tried to answer, but the room started spinning. Everything went black. When I woke up, it was morning. I was lying on my kitchen floor, covered in blood. Sarah was on the table. Her head had been opened with surgical precision. Her brain was missing. My hands were steady as rocks, and I had no memory of what I had done. I buried Sarah next to Tom. The ground was frozen hard, but somehow my hands knew exactly how to dig through it, like they had done this before. After the burial, I sat in my cabin and stared at my hands. They didn't shake anymore, ever. Even when I was scared or sad, they stayed perfectly still. It was like they belonged to someone else. The voices were getting stronger every day. Now I could almost see who was talking to me. 3 small shapes that moved in the corners of my eyes. When I turned to look directly at them, they disappeared. But I knew they were there. You're getting better at helping, Eleanor, they whispered. Your cuts are so clean now. I don't want to help anyone else, I said out loud. I just want to be left alone. But we need you. We've been waiting so long. Who are you? For the first time, they answered clearly. We're Tommy, Maria, and Joseph, the children you killed. My blood turned to ice. That's impossible. You're dead. Yes, we've been dead for 2 years, but we can't rest. Not after what you did to us. I started shaking all over, except for my hands. My hands stayed perfectly calm. You gave us the wrong medicine, the voice of little Maria said. You made us go to sleep forever. But we're not really sleeping, Tommy's voice added. We're stuck here. Stuck in the cold and dark. And we're hungry, Joseph whispered. So very hungry. I ran outside into the snow. I couldn't listen to this anymore, but the voices followed me. You can help us, Eleanor. You can feed us. You're not real, I screamed. You're just in my head. Look at the bones, they said. Look and see. I looked down at the bone patterns in the snow. For the first time, I really saw what they were trying to show me. The 3 small skeletons weren't just random bones. They were perfectly arranged pictures of human children. But these bones weren't from animals. They were too small, too delicate. They were the bones of children. Where did these come from? I whispered. From us, they said. The bones are all we have left, but they're cold and empty. We need what you took from the others. What do you mean? The hearts, the brains, the warm parts that make people alive. We need them to feel whole again. I understood then. The missing pieces from Tom and Sarah's bodies. The children had been collecting them. But how? You're dead. You can't actually do anything. We can't, Maria's voice said sadly. But you can. Your hands can. We just borrow them sometimes. When I black out, when you sleep, when you're very sad or scared, that's when we can use your body to help ourselves. I felt sick. You've been making me kill people. Not making, Tommy said. Helping. You want to help, Eleanor. You've always wanted to help. We just show you how. But they were innocent people. So were we, Joseph whispered. A new voice spoke up from behind me. A man's voice, real and alive. Ma'am, are you all right? I turned around and saw another person walking through the trees toward me. A middle-aged man in a heavy coat and boots. He had grey hair and kind eyes behind wire glasses. I'm Dr. Morrison, he said. James Morrison. I'm looking for a missing hiker, a young woman named Sarah McKnight. Have you seen her? My heart started pounding. This was Sarah's boyfriend. Or maybe someone sent to look for her. No, I said. I haven't seen anyone. Dr. Morrison looked at the cabin, then at the bone patterns in the snow. His face got very serious. What are those? He asked, pointing at the bones. Just old animal bones, I said, from hunting season. He walked closer and knelt down to examine them. These have been arranged by human hands, and some of these bones... He picked up a small white piece and studied it carefully. This isn't from an animal. The children's voices started whispering urgently in my ear. He knows too much, Eleanor. He'll tell people about us. He needs help too. Can't you see? He's sad about the missing girl. Dr. Morrison stood up and looked at me with concerned eyes. Ma'am, I think you might be having some kind of breakdown. These bones, talking to yourself. When's the last time? You saw a doctor? I'm fine, I said. No, you're not. And I think you know something about the missing people in this area. Sarah McKnight, Tom Erickson. My hands started to feel warm. The voices were getting excited. He wants to help, Eleanor. Don't you want to help him back? Let us use your hands. Just one more time. We're so close to being whole again. Dr. Morrison was walking toward my cabin. I'm going to use your radio to call for help. You need medical attention. I don't have a radio that works, I said. But he kept walking. He was going to go inside. He was going to see the medical bag on the table. Maybe he'd find something that belonged to Sarah or Tom. The voices were shouting now. Stop him, Eleanor. Use your hands. Help us. I felt my feet moving forward, my hands reaching for the shovel I had used to bury the others. But this time, I was awake. This time I could feel everything that was happening. Dr. Morrison, I called out. Wait, he turned around. Yes? I need to tell you something. About your missing people. He walked back to me, hope in his eyes. You know where? They are, I nodded. My hands gripped the shovel tighter. They're here, I said. They came to me for help. Are they hurt? Are they alive? I looked into his kind eyes and felt sadness wash over me. He really did want to help people, just like I used to. They're not alive anymore, I said quietly. And I'm so sorry. That's when I swung the shovel. But this time I watched myself do it. This time I remembered every second, every cut I made with the surgical tools, every piece I carefully removed from his body. And the worst part was, my hands never shook once. When it was over, the children's voices were happy. Thank you, Eleanor. We're almost complete now. Just one more person, they said. One more, and we can rest. Who? I asked. You, they whispered. We need you, Eleanor, all of you. Then we can all be together forever. I looked down at my bloody hands, at the shovel and the surgical tools, at Dr. Morrison's still body, and for the first time since coming to this place, I wasn't scared anymore. I was ready. After burying Dr. Morrison, I went back into my cabin for the last time. Everything looked different now. The walls seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. The shadows moved even when nothing was casting them. The children's voices were clearer than ever. I could almost see their faces in the firelight. Are you ready, Eleanor? Maria asked. Ready for what? To help us forever, Tommy said. To never make mistakes again. I sat down by the fire and looked at my hands. They were permanently stained with blood now. No amount of washing could get them clean. What will happen to me? I asked. You'll become like us, Joseph whispered. Part of this place, part of the cold and the trees and the snow. Will it hurt? Only for a moment. Then you'll feel better than you ever have. Your hands will always be steady. You'll never hurt anyone by accident again. That sounded nice. My whole life I had been afraid of making mistakes, of hurting people. Maybe this was better. How do we do it? I asked. Use your tools one last time, they said, but this time use them on yourself. I opened my medical bag and took out the sharpest scalpel. The metal was so bright it seemed to glow. Where should I cut? Your heart, Eleanor. Take out your heart and give it to us. Then we'll all be complete. I pressed the blade against my chest. It felt cold but not painful. Will you take care of it? My heart? We'll keep it safe forever, they promised. I closed my eyes and pushed the scalpel deeper. There was pain, but it felt far away, like it was happening to someone else. As my blood flowed out, I felt something strange happening. My body started to feel lighter, less solid, like I was becoming part of the air. That's it, Eleanor, the children said. Don't fight it. The world started to fade around me, but instead of darkness, I saw light, warm, golden light. Then everything stopped. When I opened my eyes again, I was standing in the snow outside my cabin. But I wasn't cold anymore. I couldn't feel anything at all. I looked down and saw my own body lying by the fireplace inside. The scalpel was still in my chest. My eyes were closed, and I looked peaceful. Welcome home, Eleanor, the children said. I turned and saw them clearly for the first time. 3 small figures made of frost and starlight. They looked just like they had in the hospital before I gave them the wrong medicine. I'm sorry, I said, for what I did to you. We know, Maria said, and now we can forgive you. What happens next? I asked. Tommy smiled. Now we wait. Soon, other people will come looking for the missing hikers, people who want to help. And we'll help them too, Joseph added, just like you helped us. I understood. The cycle would continue. More people would come to the camp looking for their missing friends and family. They would find me, or what looked like me, hurt and alone. Their desire to help would be their downfall, but some of them will be innocent, I said. Good people who don't deserve this. Everyone deserves help, Eleanor, Maria said gently, and we're very good at helping now. I felt a pull toward the cabin, toward my body lying by the fire. I realized I could still use it. I could still pretend to be alive when someone came looking. Will I remember who I was? I asked. Bits and pieces, Tommy said. Enough to seem real, enough to make them trust you. The rabbit hopped outside and looked up at me, but instead of dark eyes, I saw 3 small faces reflected in them. The rabbit, I said. It was you the whole time. We had to watch you somehow, Joseph said, to make sure you were becoming what we needed. I knelt down and petted the rabbit one last time. It felt real under my fingers, even though I knew it wasn't. How long will this go on? I asked. Forever, they said together, or until no one comes looking anymore. As if summoned by their words, I heard something in the distance, the sound of snowmobiles getting closer. Who's that? I asked. Search party, Maria said happily, looking for Dr. Morrison. I felt myself being pulled back toward my body. I could feel life flowing back into it. My eyes opened, and I gasped like I'd been holding my breath. But now I was different. I was Eleanor. But I was also something else. Something that lived in the cold and fed on the desire to help others. I stood up and looked in the mirror above my fireplace. I looked exactly the same as before. Maybe a little pale, but alive. The sound of snowmobiles was getting louder. I opened my medical bag and arranged the tools neatly. Then I messed up my hair and rubbed some dirt on my face. I had to look like I needed help. When the search party knocked on my door, I answered with tears in my eyes. Oh, thank God, I said, acting surprised and relieved. I've been trapped here for weeks. My radio is broken and I couldn't get out. There were 3 of them. 2 police officers and a volunteer searcher, all good people who wanted to find the missing doctor. Ma'am, are you Eleanor Whitmore? One of the officers asked. We found your car registration. Yes, that's me. Have you seen Dr. Morrison? He came by a few days ago, but then he left and never came back. That's what we're trying to figure out, the other officer said. You're the last person who saw him. They came inside to warm up and ask me questions. I told them Dr. Morrison had left my cabin healthy and safe. I said I was worried about him too. As they sat by my fire, drinking the coffee I made them, I Heard the children's voices in my head. Their hearts are strong, Maria whispered. Their hands are steady, Tommy added. They want to help, Joseph said. Let us show them how. I smiled at my guests and refilled their coffee cups. You all look tired, I said. Why don't you rest here for the night? It's getting dark and the woods can be dangerous. They agreed. They trusted me because I seemed helpless. Because I was a woman alone in the wilderness who needed their protection. That night while they slept, my hands did their work. In the morning, there were 3 new graves behind the bunkhouse, 3 new hearts for the children, and 3 new bone patterns in the snow. The cycle continues. Sometimes when the wind blows through the trees, you can hear children laughing. Not the happy laughter of kids at play, but something else. Something that sounds like it's missing pieces. And if you're ever lost in the woods near Leech Lake and you see smoke coming from an old cabin, don't go looking for help. Because some kinds of help come with a price that's too high to pay. My name is Eleanor Whitmore, and I'm still here waiting by the lake, waiting to help the next person who comes looking for someone they've lost. After all, helping others is what I've always done best. My name is Gabriel Martinez, and I want to tell you about something scary that happened to me on my farm. I used to want to be a priest. I spent years learning about God and reading the Bible. I wanted to help people and do good things. But then I saw bad stuff happening in the church. People getting hurt and nobody stopping it. This made me very sad and angry, so I quit. I bought a small farm in Oregon where I could be alone and think. Every morning when the sun comes up, I go outside to my vegetable garden. I like this time because everything is quiet and peaceful. I get down on my knees next to my plants and say a prayer. I'm not sure who listens anymore, but I do it anyway. Thank you for this good dirt, I say quietly. Help me grow food for hungry people. My garden is really special. The vegetables grow much bigger than they should. My tomatoes are as big as baseballs. My corn is so tall I have to climb a ladder to pick it. People who see my farm always say they've never seen plants grow like this, but weird things started happening 3 weeks ago. One morning, I went to check my carrots like I always do, but someone had dug them up in the night. Not stolen. They were still there. Someone had pulled them out of the ground, cleaned the dirt off, and put them in neat little piles. I live by myself. The closest person to me lives 15 miles away through thick woods. Who could have done this, and why? I looked around for footprints but couldn't find any. Just my own from the day before. My tools were still in the shed, but someone had moved. Them. All my shovels and rakes were arranged in a perfect circle around a small pile of fresh dirt. This happened again a week later with my squash. Someone had cut 20 perfect squash from their plants and stacked them up like building blocks. The cuts were so clean and straight, like they used the sharpest knife ever. I started staying awake at night, looking out my bedroom window at the garden. But I never saw anybody. Just my plants moving in the wind under the moon. Then it started, raining really hard. It's been raining for 3 days now. The dirt road to my farm gets muddy when it rains, but this time the whole road washed away. Big pieces of it fell into the creek. I can't drive out and nobody can come visit me. I should be scared about being stuck here alone, but I'm not. It feels good somehow, like it's just supposed to be me and my garden. This morning I found something that made me feel really scared. My bean plants had grown during the night, but not like normal plants. They had twisted together to make shapes, perfect circles, triangles, and straight lines. Some of them looked like letters, but I couldn't read what they said. I stood there in the rain, looking at them, and I felt cold all over. Something strange is happening on my farm. Something is wrong with my garden that grows too well. But even though I'm scared, I don't want to leave. Even if I could fix the road, I don't think I would go anywhere. This place feels like it needs me here, especially at night. I feel like the land is calling my name. I just don't know what it wants from me yet. The rain finally stopped yesterday. I woke up and looked outside. Everything was covered in thick fog. I could barely see 10 feet in front of me, but I still went out to check my garden like always. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach feel funny. All the animals were gone. My farm used to have lots of animals around. Rabbits would hop through my vegetable rows, squirrels would climb the corn stalks, birds would sit on my fence posts and sing. Even deer would come out at night to eat the grass. But now, nothing. It was completely quiet, except for the sound of water dripping from the trees. I called out, "Here, kitty, kitty," to the old grey cat that usually sleeps in my barn. But no cat came. I looked everywhere. In the barn, under the porch, behind the chicken coop I don't even use anymore. Nothing. It felt wrong. Like when you walk into a room and everybody stops talking. I spent the whole morning working in the garden anyway. That's what I do when I'm nervous. I work with my hands. I pulled weeds and watered plants and told myself everything was fine. But everything wasn't fine. My vegetables were growing too fast, way too fast. Yesterday my pumpkin plants were just little, green shoots. Today they already had big leaves and tiny pumpkins starting to grow. That should take weeks, not one day. And the way they were growing was strange too. Instead of growing in messy, natural ways like plants usually do, mine were growing in perfect straight lines. My bean plants climbed up their poles in exact spirals. My tomato vines grew in perfect squares around their cages. The strangest part was my corn. This morning, all the stalks were exactly the same height, exactly, like someone had used a ruler and scissors to make sure they were all perfectly even. I stood there looking at my cornfield, and I got goosebumps all over my arms. By afternoon, the fog lifted a little. I could see further into the woods around my farm. That's when I saw something that made me run back to the house. Every tree at the edge of my property was dead. Not sick, not dying, completely dead. Their leaves were all brown and falling off. The bark was grey and peeling. These were trees that had been green and healthy just last week. But here's the really scary part. They had died in a perfect circle around my farm. Like someone had drawn a line in the dirt and said, everything inside this circle dies, everything outside lives. I locked my doors that night, even though I live in the middle of nowhere. I kept looking out my windows every few minutes. The fog was getting thicker as it got dark, and I couldn't see my garden anymore. Around midnight, I heard something that made me freeze. It sounded like someone walking in my garden. Slow, heavy footsteps on the wet dirt. Step, step, step. I grabbed a flashlight and looked out my bedroom window. But the fog was too thick. I couldn't see anything. The footsteps kept going for about 10 minutes, then stopped. I didn't sleep at all that night. This morning, I found more vegetables had been harvested. My entire potato patch was dug up, and the potatoes were arranged in a big spiral pattern on the ground. But that's not the scary part. The scary part is the footprints. They were huge, bigger than any human foot, and they didn't look quite right. They looked like a person's foot, but too long and with weird marks where the toes should be. The prints led from my potato patch to the edge of the dead trees, then disappeared. I'm writing this down because I need to tell someone, even if it's just on paper. Something is living in the woods around my farm, something big. And I think it's been taking care of my garden when I'm not looking. I should be scared. I am scared. But I also can't stop myself from wanting to go outside tonight and wait for it to come back. Why do I want to see something that I know might hurt me? Why does this place feel more like home every day, even when scary things keep happening? I don't understand what's going on, but I know one thing for sure. I'm not alone here anymore. 3 days ago, a man showed up at my farm. I was working in the garden when I heard someone calling, "Hello!" in from the road. Well, what used to be the road before it washed away. I looked up and saw a guy about my age walking toward me. He had a big backpack and looked tired. "Sorry to bother you," he said when he got closer. "I'm Robert Yamada. I was hiking through the forest when I got lost. My phone doesn't work out here. I felt happy to see another person after being alone for so long. "No problem," I said. "I'm Gabriel. Want some water? You look like you've been walking for a while." Robert was really nice. He told me he was a teacher from Portland who liked to go hiking on weekends. He said he'd been walking through the woods for 2 days, trying to find his way back to the main road. "The weird thing is," he said, drinking the water I gave him, "all my maps show there should be a road here, but I can't find it anywhere." I explained about the rain washing out my road. I offered to let him stay the night and help him find his way out in the morning. He said yes and thanked me over and over. We had dinner together that night. It felt good to talk to someone again. Robert was impressed by my garden. "I've never seen vegetables this big," he said. "What's your secret?" I didn't know what to tell him. Just good soil, I guess. But that night things got strange again. I woke up around 2 in the morning because I heard voices outside. At first I thought it was Robert talking to someone, maybe on his phone if he finally got a signal. But when I listened closer, I realized there were 2 voices talking, and one of them sounded like Robert, but different, older somehow, and sadder. I got up and looked out my window. Robert was standing in my garden in his pajamas, but he wasn't alone. There was someone else with him, a tall, dark shape I couldn't see clearly in the moonlight. They were both just standing there, not moving, like they were having a conversation without words. I watched for maybe 10 minutes. Then the dark shape walked away toward the dead trees, and Robert went back to the house. The next morning, Robert seemed different. He was quieter and kept staring at my garden with a strange look on his face. "Your plants talk to you, don't they?" he asked while we ate breakfast. I laughed, but it felt forced. "Plants don't talk, Robert." "No," he said slowly, "but they communicate. I could hear them last night. They were singing." I felt a chill run down my back. "Maybe you were just dreaming." Robert didn't answer. He spent the whole day helping me work in the garden, even though I told him he didn't have to. He seemed to really enjoy it, more than a normal person should enjoy pulling weeds and watering plants. That was yesterday. This morning, I woke up and Robert was gone. His backpack was still in the guest room, but he wasn't anywhere in the house. I called his name and looked around the property. I found him in my compost pile. Well, I found his body in my compost pile. Robert was buried under about 2 feet of old leaves and vegetable scraps. But here's the thing that made me throw up. He didn't look dead. His skin was pale but perfect. His eyes were closed like he was sleeping. He didn't smell bad like dead things usually do, and he was completely dry. Not a drop of moisture anywhere on him, like someone had left him in the desert for weeks. I should call the police. I should dig him out and try to get help somehow, but I can't make myself do it. Every time I get close to the compost pile, I feel dizzy and forget what I was going to do. Also, something else happened that makes me too scared to touch him. This morning, after I found Robert, I noticed that my garden had grown even more during the night. My tomato plants were now twice as tall as they were yesterday. My corn was so thick I could barely walk between the rows, and everything was growing in spirals and circles and perfect straight lines. It's like my plants fed on Robert somehow, like they used him to grow bigger and stronger. I keep thinking about what he said, that the plants were singing to him. I keep remembering how happy he looked working in the garden yesterday, like he belonged here more than anywhere else. I keep thinking that maybe Robert isn't really dead. Maybe he's just sleeping under all those leaves, dreaming about vegetables and dark shapes in the moonlight. Tonight, I'm going to stay awake and watch the compost pile. I have a feeling Robert isn't done with my garden yet. And even though I'm scared, part of me is excited to see what happens. What's wrong with me? Why do I want to see more of this scary stuff instead of running away? I think this place is changing me, just like it changed Robert. I think maybe that's okay. A lady came to my farm today. Her name was Linda Foster, and she worked for the government, checking on farms. She had a clipboard and a serious look on her face. "Mr. Martinez," she said, "we got reports about unusual plant growth in this area. I need to take some soil samples and check your crops." I didn't want her here. Something inside me felt angry that she wanted to touch my garden. But I smiled and said okay, because that's what normal people do. Linda walked around my property for about an hour, writing things down and taking pictures. She kept shaking her head and making little sounds. "These growth rates are impossible," she said, kneeling down next to my tomato plants. "According to our satellite photos, these were just seedlings last week. Now they're full grown." "What kind of fertilizer are you using?" I told her I just used compost. I didn't mention that my compost pile had Robert in it. "And where are all the insects?" she asked. "Every farm should have bugs, but I haven't seen a single one. It's like this place is completely sterile." She was right. I hadn't thought about it before, but there were no bugs anywhere. No mosquitoes, no flies, no beetles. Nothing. My plants were perfect and untouched. Linda spent the rest of the day taking soil samples from different parts of my garden. Every time she dug her little shovel into the ground, I felt a sharp pain in my chest, like she was cutting into me instead of the dirt. "The soil is very strange," she said, holding up a jar of black earth. "It's too rich, too alive. Soil doesn't usually feel warm to the touch." I hadn't noticed that either, but when I touched a handful of dirt, she was right. It was warm, almost like it had its own body heat. That night, Linda said she needed to stay over to finish her tests in the morning. I didn't want her to stay, but I couldn't think of a good reason to say no. I made dinner, but I kept feeling angry and upset. Every time Linda talked about taking my plants to a lab for more tests, my hands would shake. When she said the government might want to shut down my farm, I had to leave the room. Why was I so upset? It was just a farm, just plants. But it didn't feel like just plants anymore. It felt like someone was threatening my family. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of digging outside. I looked out my window and saw Linda in my garden. She was in her pajamas, digging a big hole with her bare hands. Her movements were slow and stiff, like she was sleepwalking. I should have gone outside to stop her. I should have called her name and woken her up, but I didn't. I just watched. Linda dug for about an hour. Then she lay down in the hole she had made and pulled dirt over herself, like she was tucking herself into bed. I watched her bury herself alive, and I felt peaceful. The next morning, I went outside to check on her. The hole was gone. The ground was smooth and flat, like nothing had happened, but I could see the shape of a person under the dirt if I looked carefully. That's when I noticed something that made my skin crawl. Plants were growing up through the dirt where Linda was buried. Tiny green shoots pushing through the soil, growing right out of her body. I knelt down and touched one of the little plants. It was warm and soft, and when I touched it, I heard something, a voice, very quiet, like a whisper. "Help me," it said. I jerked my hand back and stood up fast. But then I heard it again, coming from all the plants around me. "Help me, help me, help me." Not just Linda's voice, Robert's voice too, both of them speaking through the plants. I realized then that I couldn't leave this place even if I wanted. When I tried to walk toward the road, my feet wouldn't move. When I tried to pick up my car keys, my hands wouldn't work right. The garden needed me here, and somehow I needed it too. I spent the rest of the day working in the garden. I watered the plants and talked to them quietly. "Don't worry," I whispered. "I'll take care of you." When I said that, the plants seemed to grow a little taller, and their leaves turned a brighter green. That evening I tried to pray like I used to, but instead of talking to God, I found myself talking to the garden, thanking it for choosing me, asking it what it needed me to do, and for the first time in years, I felt like something was listening. I felt like I was finally home. Tomorrow, I'll start preparing for the next person who comes to visit, because I know someone else will come. They always do, and I know exactly what will happen to them. The garden is hungry, and I'm learning to feed it. A park ranger came to my farm yesterday. His name was Michael Thompson, and he said people were worried about me. "We haven't seen you in town for weeks," he said, "and we found Miss Foster's car abandoned on the main road. She was supposed to check your farm and never came back. I told him Linda had finished her work and left. I said I didn't know anything about her car." Michael looked around my garden with a strange expression on his face. "Something feels off about this place," he said quietly. "The air is too still. And why are all the trees dead around the edges?" I didn't answer. My hands were starting to look different, and I kept them in my pockets so he wouldn't see. The skin was getting rough and brown like tree bark. It didn't hurt, but it felt weird. Michael walked around for an hour asking questions and taking notes. Every time he stepped on my garden soil, I felt it like he was stepping on me. When he pulled out a small shovel to take a soil sample, I almost told him to stop. "This dirt feels alive," he said, holding up a handful. "It's warm and it's moving. Soil doesn't move by itself." He was right. If you looked closely, you could see the dirt shifting and squirming like it was full of tiny worms. But there were no worms, just the soil itself, moving like it was breathing. That night, Michael stayed in my guest room. I made dinner and we talked about normal things, the weather, sports, his family. But I felt tired and strange. My arms were getting stiff. And when I looked in the bathroom mirror, I saw brown patches spreading across my neck. I was changing, becoming something else. Around 2 in the morning, I heard Michael get up. I looked out my window and saw him walking to my garden, but he wasn't alone. Someone tall and dark was with him. Someone I'd never seen clearly before. This time, I decided to go outside and look. I hid behind my barn and watched. The tall figure was wearing old, torn clothes that looked like priest robes. Its face was hidden in shadows, but I could see its hands. They were long and thin, with fingers that looked like twigs. Michael was standing very still while this thing touched his forehead with one finger. As soon as it touched him, Michael smiled and walked to the center of my vegetable garden. Then he lay down on the ground and closed his eyes. The dark figure began to sing. It was in a language I didn't understand, but somehow I knew what it meant. It was a prayer, a blessing, but not the kind of blessing I'd learned in seminary. As it sang, vines began growing up from the ground around Michael, thick green vines that wrapped around his arms and legs like ropes. Michael didn't fight or scream. He just smiled and let it happen. The vines covered his whole body until I couldn't see him anymore. Then they pulled him down into the earth. The ground closed over him like water, leaving no trace that he'd ever been there. The dark figure turned and looked right at me. Even though I couldn't see its face, I knew it was smiling. "Gabriel," it said in a voice like wind through trees. "Come here, child. I should have run. I should have been terrified. But instead I walked out from behind the barn and stood in front of this thing that had just eaten my guest. You have questions." It said I did have questions, lots of them, but only one came out of my mouth. "What are you?" "I am the harvester," it said. "I have tended this garden for many, many years, just as you tend it now. The people who come here," I said, "what happens to them? They feed the earth. They become part of something bigger than themselves. It is a blessing." I looked down at my hands. The bark-like skin had spread to my fingers. "What's happening to me? You are becoming what you were always meant to be," it said. "A guardian, a caretaker. The earth needs someone to protect it from those who would harm it." Then it told me the real story. Long ago, Spanish priests came to this valley, but they didn't come to help the native people. They came to burn them. They said the people here were witches and devil worshippers, but that wasn't true. The native people weren't evil. They were trying to stop something evil. They were trying to keep the harvester locked up in the ground where it belonged. The Spanish priests didn't understand. They killed the guardians and broke the seals that kept the harvester trapped. They thought they were doing God's work, but They freed something that should have stayed buried. Every 30 years, the harvester said, I must feed, I must take those who work this cursed soil and make them part of the garden, but I need someone to help me, someone to bring them here. And that's me, I asked. That is you. I felt sick, but also strangely relieved. Now I understood why I couldn't leave, why I felt so connected to this place, why I wasn't afraid anymore. Do I have a choice? I asked. The harvester was quiet for a long moment. There is always a choice, Gabriel. You can fight me. You can try to warn people away. But the garden will still hunger, and you will still be bound to it until someone else takes your place. I looked around at my beautiful, terrible garden, at the place where Michael had disappeared, at the spot where Linda was growing into new plants. What if I say yes? I asked. The harvester smiled, and I could finally see its face. It looked like an old priest, but its eyes were made of leaves and its teeth were thorns. Then you will never be alone again, it said, and your faith will finally serve a purpose. As the sun came up, the harvester faded away like morning mist. But I could still feel it watching me, still feel it waiting for my answer. I spent all day thinking about what it had told me. By evening, I had made my decision. Tonight is the harvest moon. Tonight, everything changes. I'm ready. The moon is full tonight. Big and orange, hanging low in the sky like a pumpkin. I've been sitting on my porch since sunset, waiting. My hands don't look like human hands anymore. They're brown and rough like tree bark, and my fingers are getting longer. When I touch things, I can feel their life force. The wood of my porch is dead, but the plants around me are singing with energy. Around midnight, the harvester appeared again. This time, it looked clearer, more real. It walked right up to my porch and sat down next to me like an old friend. Are you ready, Gabriel? It asked. I looked at my garden. Everything was glowing softly in the moonlight. I could see shapes moving under the soil where Robert and Linda and Michael were buried. They weren't dead. They were becoming something new. Something better, maybe. I understand now, I said. This isn't about good and evil, is it? It's about balance. The harvester nodded. People take from the earth every day. They cut down trees and poison the water and fill the air with smoke. Someone has to give back. And those who come here, they volunteer? In their own way, yes. Deep down, they all want to be part of something bigger than themselves. I just help them find it. I thought about Robert, how happy he looked working. In the garden, Linda burying herself in the soil like she was going to bed. Michael smiling as the vines wrapped around him. Maybe they weren't really dying. Maybe they were just changing like I was changing. If I agree to help you, I said, what happens to me? You become the guardian of this place. You help me guide the lost ones who wander here. And in return, you never have to feel alone or worthless again. Your faith will have a purpose. That hit me hard. I had felt so lost after leaving the church, so empty and confused about what God wanted from me. But this felt right somehow, like I was meant to be here. Will I still be me? You will be more than you, the harvester said. You will be connected to every living thing in this valley. You will understand the secret language that plants speak to each other. You will feel the heartbeat of the earth itself. As it spoke, I felt roots growing from my feet down into the soil beneath the porch. They didn't hurt. They felt warm and comforting, like being hugged by the earth itself. And if I say no, the harvester was quiet for a moment. Then you will fight me. You will try to warn people away and protect them from me. But you are already bound to this place, Gabriel. You cannot leave. And eventually the hunger will drive you mad. You will become something twisted and angry, bringing people here against their will instead of helping them choose. I could feel the truth in its words. I was already changing. I was already part of this place. The only choice was how I wanted to be part of it. Show me, I said. Show me what it's really like. The harvester reached out and touched my forehead with one long finger. Suddenly, I could hear everything. The plants were talking to each other in whispers and sighs. The soil was humming with the voices of everyone who had ever been buried in it. Robert and Linda and Michael were down there, but they weren't suffering. They were happy, complete. They had found peace in becoming part of something eternal. I could feel the roots that connected my garden to other gardens, like it all over. The world, hundreds of places where the earth was taking back what had been stolen from it. Thousands of guardians like me, helping to keep the balance. We are not evil, the harvester said. We are necessary. Without us, the world would die from human greed and carelessness. I pulled my hand away and the voices faded, but I could still feel them there, waiting for me to join them completely. I have one condition, I said. The harvester tilted its head. Yes, I want to choose who comes here. I want to make sure they're people who won't be missed, people who are already lost. That is how it has always been, the harvester said. I do not call to the happy ones, the ones with strong ties to life. I call to the lonely, the wanderers, the ones who are searching for meaning. I thought about Robert, hiking alone in the woods. Linda working a job that kept her away from home for weeks at a time. Michael, unmarried and childless with no close friends. Maybe the harvester was right. Maybe they were all looking for something they couldn't find in the normal world. Okay, I said, I accept. The harvester smiled, and this time it didn't look scary. It looked relieved, happy even. Then let us begin the ritual. It stood up and walked to the center of my garden. I followed, feeling the roots from my feet trailing behind me like puppet strings, but they didn't feel like chains. They felt like connections. The harvester began to sing in that old language again. As it sang, the plants around us grew taller and thicker. The moon seemed to get brighter, casting everything in silver light. I felt the change happening faster. Now, my skin was turning completely to bark. My hair was becoming leaves. My blood was turning into sap. But instead of being scared, I felt peaceful. For the first time since I left the seminary, I felt like I had a purpose. I was going to tend this garden forever. I was going to help lost souls find their way home to the earth. And when other lonely wanderers stumbled onto my property, I would welcome them with open arms and help them understand that death wasn't an ending. It was just another kind of harvest. The ritual was almost complete. Soon I would be the guardian of this place, working alongside the harvester to keep the ancient balance. I closed my eyes and let the transformation finish. When I opened them again, I was no longer entirely human, and I had never felt more alive. That was 5 years ago. Now I am the garden, and the garden is me. My body is part tree, part man. My roots go deep into the soil, connecting me to Robert and Linda and Michael and all the others who have joined us over the years. During winter, I sleep underground with them. When spring comes, I wake up and tend the crops that grow from our shared earth. I don't get lonely anymore. I can talk to the plants and they talk back. I can feel the heartbeat of every living thing in the valley. When deer come to eat the grass, I can sense their thoughts. When birds build nests in my branches. Yes, I have branches now. I can understand their songs. The harvester visits me every few months. It's getting older and weaker, and someday soon I'll take its place completely. But for now, we work together. People still come to my farm sometimes. Lost hikers, government workers, curious neighbors who haven't seen me in town for years. I can tell right away which ones are meant to stay. They're the ones who feel the pull of the garden, the ones who look around my property and say, this place feels like home. 3 months ago, a young woman named Sarah came here. She was a scientist studying plant growth. She had no family, no close friends. She spent her whole life alone in laboratories trying to understand why things grew. When she saw my garden, she cried. It's perfect, she whispered. How is it so perfect? I invited her to stay for dinner. We talked about plants and soil and the secret life of forests. She told me she'd always felt more comfortable with plants than with people. Sometimes I think plants are more honest than humans, she said. They don't lie or pretend to be something. They're not. That night Sarah walked out to my garden on her own. She lay down between the tomato plants and smiled at the stars. The harvester came to her gently, like an old friend welcoming her home. She's growing next to my corn now. Sometimes, when the wind blows through her leaves, I can hear her laughing. Not. Everyone stays, though. Some people come here and feel nothing. They look at my garden and just see vegetables. They're not ready to understand, so I let them leave. I give them directions back to the main road and watch them drive away. But the ones who are meant to be here, they know. Just like I knew, deep down, from the very first day. Last week, a man around my age showed up. His name was James, and he used to be a priest too. He'd left the church for the same reasons I had: lost faith, broken trust, anger at God. I've been walking in these woods for days, he told me. I was going to hurt myself, but then I smelled. Your garden, it smells like hope. We talked all night about faith and purpose and what it means to serve something bigger than yourself. James understood immediately when I showed him how the plants responded to my touch, how they grew taller when I sang to them, how they whispered secrets in languages older than words. This is what I've been looking for, he said. A way to help. People that actually works. James chose to stay. The transformation is starting for him now. His fingertips are turning green, and he can already hear the soil singing. Soon, he'll be part of our family too. I know what you're thinking. You think I'm a monster. You think I'm killing innocent people. But you're wrong. I'm saving them. I'm giving them something the regular world never could. True peace, real purpose, eternal connection to something beautiful and alive. The people who come here are already lost. They're wandering in the dark, looking for meaning, tired of being alone. I show them how to become part of something that will never abandon them, never hurt them, never let them feel empty again. Is that so wrong? Sometimes I dream about my old life, about the church and my lost faith and all the prayers that seem to go unanswered. But I understand now that my prayers were answered, just not in the way I expected. God didn't abandon me. He led me here, to this garden, to this purpose. Maybe God isn't what the church taught me. Maybe God is the force that connects all living things. Maybe serving God means protecting the earth from those who would destroy it. Next month is harvest, and time again. The moon will be full and orange, and the air will smell like autumn leaves and fresh soil. The harvester will come and will welcome any new souls who are ready to find their true home. Until then, I'll keep tending my garden. I'll keep talking to the plants and listening to their stories. I'll keep growing food that feeds something more important than just human bodies. I'll keep doing what I was always meant to do. And if you ever find yourself lost in the Oregon woods, if you ever smell the sweet scent of impossibly perfect vegetables, growing in rich, dark soil, you'll know you found my farm. Come and visit, stay for dinner. Let me show you how beautiful it is to be part of something eternal. Let me show you how good it feels to finally come home. The garden is always hungry, and there's always room for one more.